Chapter 1007. He could not swallow such a big cake by himself. In order to transport this thing back, the northern witches and Arendel's power must be borrowed. If Soren and Princess Royal joined forces, they should be able to greatly reduce the consumption of divine power and avoid the possibility of some disasters. There was also the problem of the strong radiation of the asteroid. This required a huge protective energy enchantment and an isolation area. The source of the radiation should be the annihilation material. As long as Soren took away the annihilation material, the crystals and diamonds on the surface should not have such terrible radiation. The birth and destruction of matter was a very long process. In theory, many planes that currently existed could also be destroyed. Many annihilation materials were born because of the collapse of some half-planes. When a half-plane was about to die, a large amount of matter and energy would shrink extremely, and something like a black hole would form inside, and eventually connect to the distorted void. Finally, when the entire plane or the divine kingdom was destroyed, the extremely collapsed and contracted elements would be born into annihilation materials. They were things that were difficult for mortals to touch. Too strong radiation would kill mortals, and only high-grade legends and gods would pay attention to these things. Some demigod liches would try to use annihilation materials as phylacteries. In this way, unless it was a god, ordinary people could not destroy the phylacteries at all, and they could be resurrected constantly. It seems that I have to go and see Princess Royal. If he wanted to transport this crystallized asteroid back, it would cost a lot of manpower and material resources. It would be difficult for Mordor to transfer so many spellcasters to complete it. Soren had to borrow some ice witches from Arendelle, and at the same time, let some of the high-grade witches of the Northern Tower participate in it. As for the distribution of benefits, it was very simple. The diamond on the surface alone was enough to pay the reward. Moo! The scream of the astral giant whale came. Soren turned around and found that the astral sand in the distance was rippling, and then another larger astral giant whale appeared. It seemed that they were fighting for position. Two astral giant whales were fighting in the void. They followed the asteroid and did not want to leave its track, but they did not dare to get too close. Energy radiation? Soren seemed to have thought of something. He muttered, "Astral creatures seem to eat radiation as their food. This astral giant whale seems to like the radiation, but it seems to be afraid of it. It seems like they can't withstand such intense radiation." Even Soren couldn't withstand the radiation in his saint form, so these astral whales probably couldn't handle it either. They only dared to follow from a distance, enjoying the radiated energy. And now, it was obvious that an even more powerful astral whale had set its sights on this place and was preparing to fight for this spot. The vitality of astral whales was even more astonishing than giant dragons. Killing them was a thankless task and there wasn't much value in doing so. The astral whale only had one legendary core, and it could teleport away when it was in danger of death. Basically, all living creatures in the astral plane were close to legendary. Soren would have to kill his way into their bodies if he wanted to kill them. Forget it for now. Soren's energy radiation had reached thousands of points, and even his energy shield was broken. He directly cast a teleportation spell and prepared to go back. He would come back to see if he needed to deal with these astral whales after everything was ready. A ray of light appeared. When Soren came back to his senses, he was already standing in the void. Ha! Where is this? Soren looked around in surprise. In front of him was a vast and boundless sky. He could tell at a glance that this was not a material plane because he could barely see land. He could only see large clouds that stretched for thousands of kilometers. There were also thunderstorms in the distance, and the wind elements in the air were abnormally active. Some elemental spirits with wings flew across the sky, and he could vaguely see an island floating in the air. This was not a man-made floating island. It was a floating island formed by the characteristics of the plane. This seems to be the wind elemental plane? The gravity in this world was very low. There was an endless sea of clouds visible to the naked eye, and there was almost no land or sea below. There was only an endless sky. The wind elements were abnormally active here, and most of the creatures in the perception range of the gods had wings. Because the gravity was very low, if it rained in the wind elemental plane, it would fall directly into the air and then gradually evaporate, forming clouds in the sky below. This was a world shrouded in a sea of clouds. There were only a few lands in the entire wind elemental plane, and most of them were the territories of the Jinn. They were relatively easygoing creatures, and they built their own fortresses with material blocks, as long as it was solid. In the absence of material, the residents of the wind elemental plane would use ice as their building. Teleportation interference? Soren stood in the sky and fell into deep thought. He murmured, "Is it because of gravity or energy that distorts the space structure and interferes with the teleportation? If that's the case, it's a bit troublesome." The wind elemental plane was not a place to stay. Soren directly opened the teleportation lock on the city of Mordor, and then disappeared from this world. Shortly after he left, a djinn shrouded in the demigod's aura appeared nearby and wondered, "Is there a god visiting the wind elemental plane?" But it seems that he has left. After saying that, he disappeared on the spot. The djinn were some lazy creatures, and they only actively fought against the bottomless abyss. For a long time they lived their own lives. Mordor City, Arcane Tower. As soon as Soren came back, Gloria greeted him and whispered, "How was it?" Soren's avatar disappeared, and then his original body stood up and said, "The harvest is more amazing than I thought. But it's also very difficult. I'm afraid we can't do it with our strength alone." After that, he introduced the situation of the asteroid, including super strong radiation, more than 50 times the gravity, and the astral giant whale that followed next to it. "Is the gravity so strong?" Gloria frowned and whispered, "If the gravity is so strong, it's basically impossible for ordinary people to get close. Can you cut it and bring it back?" Soren shook his head and said, "It's too expensive. Its structure is very hard, and just the outer layer is close to the hardness of steel. My divine power can't support cutting at all, and it's very slow to use weapons." Gloria fell into deep thought. After a while she looked up and said, "So you're going to send it to the shadow plane first?" Soren nodded. Gloria whispered, "The impact is too big. I'm afraid the shadow plane can't bear it. The elements collapse to such an extent. This asteroid was originally not much smaller than a half-plane. It would definitely cause a disaster if it hit the shadow plane. What else can we do?" Soren said. Gloria thought for a while, then suddenly said to the air, "Thaling. Calculate the capacity of the lock at full power, and the energy needed to fully open the lock." Gloria's words immediately opened Soren's mind. He looked up and said in surprise, "You're going to use the lock to reduce the impact?" Gloria nodded and said, "We can try. If it's possible, we can try to create an anti-gravity barrier and place a huge floating ring on it. With your divine power, it should be able to reduce the impact to a minimum." Floating ring? That was a good idea. The floating ring could greatly reduce the impact of the asteroid after entering the shadow plane. Coupled with the energy of the magic lock as well as the divine power of Soren and the Elder Princess, it might be able to safely land in the shadow plane. Was worth a try. Soren immediately had an idea. He looked up and said, "I'm going to see the Princess Royal now. You're in charge of contacting the Eye of the North. I'm sure they'll be interested." It was hard for women to resist diamonds, especially such a big one. Soren was confident that he could convince the Princess Royal, and the Ice Witch's demand for diamonds was not small. According to Soren's judgment of the asteroid, even if he distributed a part of the profits, his harvest was enough to make thousands of diamond golems. Of course, he couldn't invest all the diamonds in it. Many alchemy techniques during the Arcane Empire also required diamonds. To bear its weight, the floating ring must be very large. Gloria thought for a moment and said, "Mother is now in the sigil and I can't rely on my own strength. You'd better persuade the Princess Royal to help me." Princess Royal was also a top-level spellcaster. Gloria needed the Princess Royal's divine power to help complete this huge floating ring. The floating ring was originally planned to be placed on the entire island of Moder, and the largest area it could bear was about half of the island of Taiwan. Gloria continued, "This floating ring is made up of a total of 1 main ring and 35 auxiliary rings. At present, there are 12 auxiliary rings that can be used. The current progress of the main ring is only about 50%. We need a large number of mithril and adamantine. If he wanted to harvest, he had to invest first." Soren frowned and thought for a moment, "I'll find a way to do that." The city of Moder had reserves of mithril and adamantine, but they couldn't meet such a large consumption. It seemed that he had to find a way from the treasury of Arendelle. It was impossible to give up this diamond fossilized asteroid. After Soren got it, he could immediately start to make diamond golems on a large scale. At that time, the combat power of the city of Moder would be greatly improved. It could even be said that he already had some confidence in winning the Avatar's crisis. The withered wilderness. A figure shrouded in a black robe suddenly appeared. His pale pupils were jumping with soul fire, and his skeleton seemed to be about to fall apart. "Damn the goddess of magic and death. This bitch who only wants to steal the fruit of death." How did she find me? Naruto? Did she betray me? The figure shrouded in a black robe was a lich. On his staff, there was an emblem of a laughing lich skull wearing a crown, with a solid black hexagon background. Chapter 1008. The city of Mordor was ready for war. A large number of navies began to gather near Raging Sand Island. For this expedition, there was some commotion in the barracks inside the city of Mordor. When they learned that the army was going to the Principality of Rossard, many officers of Mordor were eager to try. They were different from the veteran pirate army. These people had less combat experience and were more eager to prove their value. But what they didn't expect was that this battle was actually handed over to the pirates, which made some people feel disappointed. The most valuable thing in Mordor was military merit. Military merit could be exchanged for resources, money, land, houses, and power. In theory, most of what mortals needed could be exchanged through military merit. More importantly, military merit could also be exchanged for some things that could not be obtained through conventional channels, such as making it easier for their children to become a professional, a priest, a wizard, etc. The soldiers of Mordor were eager for military merit, but now that they were stationed on Mordor Island, there were fewer channels to obtain military merit. It was not easy to have a big operation, but the result was that the navies outside were diverted, which inevitably made many newly promoted officers feel disappointed. However, the pirates were happy about this order. They thought that even if they were not in Mordor, they were still very important in Sir Soren's heart. The vast sea needed them to guard, and when there was a really difficult battle, Sir Soren's first thought was the pirate army that followed him everywhere, not the new recruits in Mordor. The military faction of Mordor was currently divided into two rows. One was the original pirate leader class, and the other was the new officer class. In the view of these pirate leaders, it was obvious that their value and status were higher, so they were eager to prove themselves and asked to fight. The city hall also accepted their request. The main force of this battle was still pirates, and there were only about 9,000 elites on Mordor's side. In name, Mordor and the Principality of Rossard were temporarily reconciled, one in the south and one in the north, and at the same time, they gathered forces to stop the attack of the undead army. However, the real battle had yet to break out. Fighting against the undead army required a sufficient number of troops. Otherwise, it would be easy to be drowned by the sea of undead. This time, about 100,000 troops would be gathered for the battle. Among them, the number of professions would be greatly increased. The goal was to wipe out the undead on the south coast in one go. There was no need for Soren to deal with these matters personally. The commanders of this battle were many pirate leaders, including the half-elf first mate, Adele Isabella, Sir One-Eyed Dragon, and so on. The nominal supreme commander was the high priest. Fighting against the undead was not something that could be eliminated in a day or two. Soren's focus was still on finding ways to transport the Diamond Planet back. Therefore he paid a visit to Arendelle the next day. Inside the palace, Princess Royal received Soren's avatar. Although she had officially become a god, Princess Royal and Soren were both unable to return to the Kingdom of God. Thus, she was still living in Arendelle's palace. However, she was no longer in charge of the kingdom's affairs. A meteorite made entirely of diamond? After hearing Soren's words, Princess Royal couldn't help but raise her head in surprise. Really? Have you seen it with your own eyes? The Astral Wanderer often sells some information, but the authenticity is not that high. Soren nodded. I've seen it with my own eyes. This is a sample from above. You can take a look. This meteorite is very valuable, so we have to get it as soon as possible. A diamond ore appeared in Soren's palm. In order to be more convincing, Soren also brought back some samples. The one in front of them was one of them. The other one was given to the Northern Tower for the Eye of the North to personally appraise. Princess Royal was surprised when she saw the fist-sized diamond. It was hard for women to resist the temptation of diamonds. But then she frowned and said, "Why is there such a strong negative energy corrosion? This meteorite seems to have passed through the lower planes, right?" "This is the aura of the Chaos Sea." "Did this meteorite pass near the Chaos Sea?" As the top spellcaster in the material plane, Princess Royal could see more things. She couldn't help but murmur, "This meteorite seems to have passed through the lower planes, and it's close to the position of the twisted nether. When you found it, did you feel a strong radiation?" Soren was a little surprised and nodded. "Yes, there is indeed a strong radiation on it, so I need your help." Princess Royal's expression became serious. She pondered for a moment and said, This thing can't be brought back to the material plane. Its energy radiation is very fatal to mortals. If it's brought back to the material plane, it can kill all the mortals on the island of Motor in a day. Was it that exaggerated? Soren was surprised and murmured, "The radiation of this thing is so terrible. I don't know if it's possible." Speaking of this, Soren stopped. Even with his divine body he was hurt, so it was even more terrible for mortals. This thing's radiation range was very large. If it was brought back to the material plane, it could instantly cover the area of an island. Living creatures and mortals in this range would be extremely dangerous. "I'm going to send it to the shadow plane." Soren thought for a moment and told her his plan, including using the floating ring to reduce its impact. Princess Royal thought for a moment and nodded. "With the two of us working together there should be no problem." "But when can the floating ring be made?" Hearing her words, Soren's expression was a little awkward. "It'll be fast. But the materials are a little short and I may need your help. After all, ordinary witches can't complete the task." Princess Royal bowed her head and didn't say anything. After a few minutes, he raised his head and said indifferently, "What are the missing materials? Leave it to me. I can help with the floating ring, but now the undead disaster is getting worse. We'd better finish this as soon as possible." Soren nodded. Then he took out a list of rare mithril and adamantine materials. Most of the materials in Mordor City were available, but these two were not common in the Abyss. The eldest princess took it and glanced at it. Then she said calmly, "No problem. Send it to Mordor City tomorrow." Surprised. This time Soren was really surprised. The materials on this list were more than the inventory of Mordor City, and Princess Royal said it was no problem without blinking. It seemed that Arendel's background was deeper than he thought. But it was normal. A kingdom that had been passed down for hundreds of years, and it was the birthplace of the Ice Witches, so it must have accumulated a lot of resources. With the help of Princess Royal, the speed of the plan suddenly accelerated. There was also good news from the Northern Tower. The Eye of the North would fully assist Gloria. It only took 3 days and the main floating ring was completed. They could prepare to bring the Diamond Planet back in 1 or 2 days at most. The mechanical realm of the clock Nirvana. With a golden light, Soren's avatar appeared in this huge clock-like plane. As soon as Soren arrived, he received a happy message from the Queen of the Fermi Ants. She said happily, "My master, you are finally back. I have fused with the divinity you gave me. Now the size of the insect swarm has doubled. I defeated another queen and completely swallowed her clan. Your servant is breeding a new kind of combat soldier ant. If it succeeds, it will be more powerful than ordinary soldier ants, which will be a useful help for Master." The insect race reproduced very quickly. Although a lot of them were killed by Soren and Thaling last time, they quickly reproduced during this period of time. However, their use for Soren was still relatively limited. This was just a foreshadowing for the future and it might be useful. Soren comforted the insect queen with his mind, and then teleported into the Thaling One's tower. "Welcome, sir, Lord of Shadows." The 3 Thaling welcomed the arrival of Soren, and Soren smiled and nodded and then said directly, "I need a whole factory to make diamond golems. Do you have a way to help me complete it?" The level of the golem factory in Mordor was not high enough. If it was to make iron golems it would be fine, but the efficiency of making diamond golems was very low. After taking down the Diamond Planet, the diamond golems in Mordor would be produced on a large scale. At this time the requirements for the golem factory would be very high. He must prepare in advance. Thaling One fell into deep thought when he heard this and then said, "No problem. But we need a little time to prepare." Soren was getting closer and closer to a great divine power. For Thaling, such a god was worth investing in and making friends with. If it weren't for the Avatar crisis, it would be difficult for them to have a relationship with a god. "Very good." Soren nodded and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you." The diamond golems were very important in his future plan. Only the diamond golems could fight against the most elite Devil Legion. The impact of the undead disaster could be resisted by mortals, but the Devil Legion that retreated from the bloody battle of the Abyss, almost all the mortals would die. Soren could only use the golems to fight against them. As the army of Mordor gradually gathered near the south coast, Soren and Princess Royal's plan to join forces to intercept the Diamond Planet officially began. This operation was led by Gloria. Soren was responsible for using the power of the divine spark to teleport the meteorite to the shadow plane, and Princess Royal assisted him in completing the plane teleportation. Gloria's task was the most difficult. She not only had to calculate the location of the meteorite falling, but also had to arrange the protective energy enchantment in advance. At the same time, she had to personally install the floating ring. However, the premise was that she must be under the protection of Soren. The radiation energy erosion was very serious, and Soren had to play the role of a healer to bless her with magic. Chapter 1009. Happy birthday to myself today. By the way, I love you guys. La la la. 2 days passed in a blink of an eye. Just before the war against the undead on the south coast was about to begin, Soren, Princess Royal, Gloria, and the Eye of the North had also begun to implement a plan to intercept the Diamond Planet. In the endless astral world. In a dreamy and gorgeous galaxy, Soren's figure first appeared near the teleportation beacon, followed by a golden light, and Princess Royal also appeared next to him. During this time, Princess Royal lived in Mordor, and Soren prepared a special luxurious room for her. However, perhaps because of the arrival of Princess Royal, the winter of the Outer Islands came early. The next day after Princess Royal stayed, light snow began to fall in Mordor, and then there was a beautiful silver-wrapped scenery between heaven and earth. Soren could feel that Princess Royal's clergy had a strong interference in the mortal world. He was afraid that after the end of the Avatar crisis, she would be the first batch of gods to return to the kingdom of God immediately. Because if she was restored to the form of a true god, Princess Royal might stop the season of the entire Frost Kingdom in winter even if she did nothing. Is this the place? Princess Royal frowned as soon as she appeared, and then a divine shield rose. She wondered, such strong negative energy radiation? I'm afraid there's not only diamond in it, but also some other evil substances. Soren was silent. There must be other reasons for such strong radiation. According to his guess, there should be something similar to an axis that had strong radiation in this multiverse. To some extent, the more microscopic particles superimposed, the stronger the radiation, so most of the destructive substances had a curse effect, and only legendary creatures could offset it. If mortals held it, they would easily age and die. There were 2 more astral whales in the distance. It seemed that during this time, other astral whales had discovered this meteorite, but they still did not dare to approach it. Let's begin. Princess Royal waved her hand and the surrounding temperature dropped significantly. Soren nodded and activated an energy barrier. Then Gloria appeared. During this period of time, she had gotten along well with Princess Royal, mainly because she had mastered part of the domain of the wizard. Princess Royal was also a part-time ice witch, and as a deity, the Princess Royal had given Gloria a lot of inspiration in the structure of the weave. Princess Royal had also learned a lot of special knowledge from Gloria. For example, she had made a finished product yesterday, an animated alchemy construct, ice golem, that she had personally given life to, as well as a lower-level, snow golem. Princess Royal's power was very special. She could construct a body completely made of ice in the blink of an eye. As long as she was willing, she could give it a trace of divine power or inject a soul crystal to activate it. This was an extremely terrifying combat strength. This meant that Princess Royal could create thousands upon thousands of ice golems to fight for her. However, this ability also had a fatal flaw, that was, the requirements for the environment and temperature. Ice golems would be damaged and melted in a high-temperature environment. They could only move freely below 0 degrees Celsius, that was to say they could only fight in a specific environment. However, there were also many advantages such as their ability to repair their bodies. This thing seemed to only have an obvious effect in a cold area. Oh. Even with Soren's energy barrier, Gloria's face turned pale after she arrived. There was nothing she could do. Although she usually took the initiative to spar with Soren and seemed to have good physical strength, in fact, her constitution was only about 15 points. With the energy barrier, she could also feel the damage from the nearby fear. Don't delay. Princess Royal frowned and urged, the negative energy here is too strong. Your current situation is quite special. You can't be directly affected. Leave here quickly after you're done. After that, she could not help but glance at Gloria's stomach. Soren seemed to be aware of this, but he did not speak. This was not the time to discuss this. It was not suitable to discuss this during the Avatar crisis. Gloria was also surprised. Then with a wave of her hand, rings appeared one by one. She used the Greater Mage's hand to control these rings out of thin air and quickly put them into the ground, while Soren was responsible for cutting the surface and arranging the floating rings one by one. 36 floating rings were arranged. The whole diamond planet shook, which meant that the plan was feasible. Soren could not help but be excited. You go back and prepare first. Leave the rest to us. After that, Soren and Princess Royal looked at each other. Saint form. As Gloria teleported away, Princess Royal and Soren entered the saint form at the same time. Change space, shard of divinity. Change reality, shard of divinity. Astral teleportation, shard of divinity. Plane teleportation, shard of divinity. A huge amount of divine power emerged. Soren and Princess Royal opened multiple shards of shard of divinity at the same time and wrapped the whole diamond planet in it. Immediately afterward, Soren waved his hand and said, "Shadow." The void in front of them split open. Then, a gray world appeared in the orbit of the asteroid. Accompanied by the brilliance of divinity, the asteroid suddenly disappeared from the astral boundary. Then, the astral giant whale following behind couldn't help but become restless. At the same time, near the tower in the shadow plane, Gloria and the Eye of the North were also waiting. The teleportation has begun. Gloria stood at the top of the arcane tower. With a wave of her hand, more than a dozen energy rings appeared. She said in a deep voice, "Thaling. Start the elemental furnace. Run the magic lock at full power. Open the protective enchantment. Activate the anti-gravity shield. Energy shield to the maximum. Raise the magic lock. Prepare for the impact." A dazzling fireball appeared. At the moment of entering the shadow plane, the whole diamond planet began to burn violently. The semi-crystal on the surface quickly melted, and then the diamond structure inside was revealed. Soren and Princess Royal looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Then two golden giants rose in the sky. Change form. Shard of divinity. Regional divine shield. The power of the magic lock alone could not support it. In order to keep the planet intact, Soren had to use the power of the regional divine shield. Two divine shields were opened. With a blazing high temperature, the first impact came. Buzz. As if hitting an invisible energy barrier, the whole diamond planet trembled violently, and some cracks and collapses occurred. Its volume also shrank to about 1 kilometer. All the floating rings were shining with a dazzling white light. The gravity of the whole space was distorted, especially Soren, who had mastered the shadow divinity. He almost used the control of the plane to release all his divine power to reduce the impact of the falling meteorite. It was obvious that the speed of the meteorite was getting slower and slower, and then slowly decreased under the effect of the floating rings. Finally, when the meteorite was about 500 meters from the ground, its speed had been reduced to about the same as a high-speed car. The last wave of impact broke out. The diamond planet collided directly with the magic lock shield. With the magic lock shield broken, the entire meteorite's speed decreased greatly at about 100 meters. Rumble. The whole ground trembled. A huge cloud of dust was lifted, and a pit of about 10 kilometers in diameter appeared. The strong impact directly flattened a nearby forest, and almost all the trees were broken. But this was not the most terrible thing. With the shroud of energy radiation, all the plants within 20 kilometers began to wither, and the surviving creatures also died. It was not until outside the negative energy shield that some withered plants could be seen. "Start cutting immediately." Gloria's hurried voice sounded. "The radiation is too strong. The shield won't last long." Soren panted and landed on the ground. On the other side, Princess Royal's full breasts were also rising and falling rapidly. Both of them had just used a lot of divine power. In the tower, Thaling's cold voice sounded. "Activate the number 1 golem formation. Activate the diamond golem formation. Activate the meteorite cutter." 2 special steel golems appeared. Their palms were very special and had been transformed into 2 huge boxes. It was the special laser device that Soren had encountered when exploring the arcane tower. This kind of magic-powered device could easily cut magic items, and they would help to complete the cutting work. However, it was impossible to cut a meteorite with a diameter of about 1 kilometer with just these 2 golems. The main force was still Soren and Princess Royal. Divine power materialization. Above the meteorite, Soren and Princess Royal's palms appeared with golden light at the same time. Then they reached out and broke the semi-crystalline surface. The internal structure of this diamond planet was not clear. It was mixed with a lot of rare materials. The surface was semi-crystalline, and there were more crystals inside. As soon as the cutting was completed, Princess Royal's surprised expression appeared. Then she waved her hand and took out a purple gem about 1 meter high from under her body. It was an unknown gem. Its hardness was about the same as a diamond. Its specific structure and function were not known, but just looking at the beautiful color and crystal appearance, it made Princess Royal's eyes shine. After the cutting work began, more and more gems were found. The whole meteorite had the most diamonds, and the number was so huge that it was unbelievable. Then there were all kinds of gems and metals with special structures. These were no longer ordinary metal materials. The surface was gray and black and the hardness was quite amazing. It was a lot of mithril and adamantine. It was worthy of being the top material in the material world. It was not transformed in this meteorite but maintained a fairly stable shape. However, because of the compression of the material, a part of the mithril had automatically formed into silver-gray metal blocks. These all needed to be refined again. After the preliminary cutting was completed, Soren began to go deeper into the interior. He needed to take out the core of the destructive material and then put it in a half-plane without living things. Otherwise, this energy protection enchantment would be broken in half a day at most. At that time, it would be a disaster for the entire shadow plane. At the same time, in the position of the arcane tower, the golems had begun to move and cut again. At the same time, Thaling set up an energy detection device in front of the arcane tower. Some objects did not have the slightest reaction when they passed by the amethyst, but some automatically lit up as soon as they got close to the amethyst and issued a sharp alarm. Then these objects were all stored separately in the half-plane. Without a doubt, these objects all carried radiative energy damage. Chapter 10:10. The whole process was busy and fast. Whether it was Gloria or Princess Royal, there was an inexplicable satisfaction on their faces when they harvested these diamonds. Perhaps for women, these gems were really irresistible even for gods. Perhaps it was because he had seen too many diamonds. Soren was now a little numb. The entire diamond asteroid was rich in a large number of gem resources, almost comparable to the core area of the Earth elemental plane. In the core area of the Earth elemental plane, the Earth Jinn liked to eat gems as food. In addition, there was a large amount of metal inside the meteorite, as well as the astral sand that had condensed into a silver-white solid. As for the most common soil and rocks in the material plane, they were basically invisible because of the collapse of the elements. The composition of the semi-crystalline solid material was not clear. Anyway, it felt a bit like tempered glass, but it was not transparent. Soren directly opened an internal passage with his divine power. It would take at least a month to cut the entire meteorite, but the protective energy enchantment could not last that long. As he went deeper into the meteorite, he felt stronger radiation energy. When he finally reached the interior of the meteorite, a strange black crystal appeared in front of Soren. It was a huge destructive substance that had never been seen before. The original structure had completely collapsed and been reassembled. Soren separated the surrounding metal, then cut it out separately. But when he reached out and touched it, his face changed. What a strong negative energy. Soren tried to put it into the half-plane, but then a terrible weight pressed down, making him frown and murmur, "This strange weight is a bit unreasonable." The strange black crystal was about the height of a person, and its weight was more than 3,000 tons. It was unbelievable. Divine form. Soren's body appeared with a golden light, and he directly opened the space door to his own small half-plane, then grabbed it and threw it in. As soon as the strange black crystal entered the half-plane, it released a strong negative energy. At the same time, because the half-plane was not fully formed, Soren immediately caused a mutation when he put it inside the half-plane. This is... Soren looked at his demi-plane in surprise and mumbled, "The gravity is increasing. The concentration of negative energy is also increasing. Double gravity. Double gravity. Triple gravity. 4 times the gravity. 5 times the gravity." As the strange black crystal gradually fused with the demi-plane, the increasing gravity began to stabilize. The gravity on the periphery of the demi-plane was about twice as strong, and the closer to the center, the stronger the gravity was. It gradually increased from 3 times to 5 times. Soren seemed to have thought of something. He whispered, "If we can increase the gravity, I wonder if we can turn this demi-plane into a training ground?" His demi-plane was independent of his divine kingdom. The divine kingdom was a kingdom brought about by the clergy and the identity of a god, and the demi-plane was created by Soren's wizard profession. In other words, the demi-plane was an independent small space, and he could let anyone enter, unlike the divine kingdom, where only his own petitioners could enter. This way there was a lot of room for manipulation. The gravity of the demi-plane itself was the same as that of the material plane. If Soren wanted to increase the gravity, he had to connect it to the elemental plane of Earth and expand it dozens of times. This required a lot of divine power, or it would take decades or even centuries. Now, the most basic gravity in the demi-plane had been completed. Soren only needed to use the power of the divinity of space alteration, and he could easily complete the transformation and make the demi-plane into a training ground. Training in a high-gravity environment was very useful for close combat professions. Although Soren's level was already very difficult to increase, it was very easy for ordinary people to improve their basic abilities. However, there was also a problem, and that was that Soren had to suppress the energy radiation. This could be greatly reduced by placing the core underground, and the demiplane's own characteristics were enough for Soren to offset some of the negative energy corrosion. However, this was not enough for low-grade professions. Even if they wanted to enter the outermost area to train, they had to be at least a profession level 10, and the inner area of the core needed to be at least a profession level 10. After Soren took away the inner core, the radiation of the meteorite quickly decreased. Then Gloria's joyful voice sounded, "The radiation on the surface of the meteorite has decreased to normal levels. Basically, ordinary people won't be hurt too much. But there are still some materials that contain negative energy. They should be from the lower planes. They just need to be stored separately." There were many dangerous materials in the lower planes, but at the same time, they were also very rare materials. Yes. Princess Royal's expression was very happy at this moment. It was rare for her to have a smile on her face when she looked at Soren. She said softly, "The harvest this time is very good. Just the diamonds that we have mined so far have made up for the initial consumption. These diamonds can help us deal with a lot of things." The amount that they had mined so far was less than 1%, but it had already made up for the consumption when they first set up the barrier and made the floating ring. In other words, Soren's harvest this time was not only the destructive substances, but also the diamond harvest alone was more than 100 times. Moreover, the closer they were to the inner area, the higher the chances of finding precious materials. Maybe we should sell some of them. At this time, Gloria said, "Currently the price of diamonds in the material plane is very high. The Wizard Alliance's demand for diamonds is not low. Maybe we can secretly sell some of them and use them to exchange for kindler and other resources." During wartime, the price of gems should have decreased. However, there was a profession called wizard in this world. Their research was piled up with gold, silver, and gems. The material plane had always been in a tight currency situation. Although the reserves of gold were huge, there was not much circulation. Every year, gold from other planes flowed into the material plane, but the total amount of gold was still barely maintained. The same was true for gems and other resources. Wizards themselves were consumers. In the case of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, gems had become a war preparation resource to some extent, and the price had been rising. Not to mention that there were dragons in the multiverse. Therefore, the price of diamonds was about 30% higher than in the past. The most important reason was that the Wizard Alliance was preparing to make diamond golems. "We should sell a batch first." Princess Royal also nodded at this time and said, "At present we can't digest so many diamonds at all, so it's best to sell a batch now. P.S. First update. Recently, I've been in contact with some game companies to open up my network for the future." Chapter 10-11. Night fell. Soren and Princess Royal also returned to the tower. Teleporting the meteorite to the shadow plane consumed a lot of divine power, so the next work was handed over to the golem puppet. Arendelle still needed Princess Royal to stay in the center, so she would return tomorrow with a batch of diamonds. The next distribution of income was that she would get 30% of the income, the northern tower would get 10% of the income, and Soren would get the remaining 60%. The first batch of diamonds had been quietly shipped out. They would be sold near the Wizard Alliance and then directly exchanged for resources. Maybe because of the diamonds, Soren clearly felt that Princess Royal was much more pleasant to him. It seemed that her favorability had improved a lot because of this cooperation. Obviously, her attitude had reached more than friendly. This was a good situation. After all, Soren and Princess Royal had a close relationship. They could not be tied together by alliance and interests alone. Personal friendliness was also very important. The golem factory in Mordor had now begun to operate. It took a lot of time to make diamond golems. At present, Alice was mainly responsible for this part. At the same time, she was also in charge of the operation of the diamond golems. According to the preliminary statistics of Thaling, if there were enough soul crystals, this diamond planet could make at least 15,000 diamond golems. 15,000 of them. The combat strength of the diamond golems exceeded that of the legendary warriors. So many diamond golems were enough to determine the outcome of a large-scale abyss blood war. Soren felt excited. This was the first time he felt that he had enough confidence to deal with the Avatar crisis because he could fight with the devils and demons by relying on the golems alone. If he added the legendary professions of Mordor and the power of the allied gods, then Soren's strength would not be worse than any divine system. However, Soren frowned when he thought of this and murmured, "At present, the only thing missing to form a divine system is the power of greater divine power. I must advance as soon as possible." A god without great divine power was not qualified to be called a divine system. The sea goddess had cultivated a lot of gods for so many years. Why was it not a divine system? Just because she was not a great divine power. Mid-level divine power only meant that you could occupy a seat among the gods. But if you wanted to divide the god system and divide the land, it was impossible to do so without a strong divine power. The framework of Soren's divine system had been created, but if he did not become a great divine power, he would still be an ally of the gods. "I'm already a great divinity." Soren frowned as he pondered. He murmured, "If I want to advance to a great divine power, I need to obtain enough divinity value. My current godhood value is 240 points. If I want to continue improving, there are very few people I can choose from. The number of gods was limited. Why were there some mortals who ascended to godhood, but there were very few who reached mid-level godhood? This was because all the divine creatures in the material plane added together could only support a god with intermediate divine power at best. As for increasing one's godhood value, it was even more difficult. Basically, every godhood value had its own godhood value. If one godhood value wanted to be promoted, another godhood value would fall. Soren still lacked 60 godhood points. If he wanted to kill a weak godhood value, he needed 6 godhood points, and he had to completely absorb their power. So Soren's goal could only be a mid-level godhood value. That way the choices would be reduced a lot. Basically, he had to choose a godhood value. Sirik is the first target. But at present his location is uncertain. Sirik has the divine title of conspiracy. It's not easy to plot against him. Soren continued to think. Now it's the undead disaster. At present, there are 2 gods that are the easiest to deal with. One is the king of the dead, Klemvox, who is seriously injured. But no one knows where he is hiding. The second one is the god of Lich, Vishalan. I know where he is. But to deal with him, I'm afraid I'll have to meet a god from another world. A god from another world. There were many gods from another world in the material plane. The entire pantheon was very tolerant of gods from another world. The orc god system was a god from another dimension, and it had spread over here from other dimensions. The god of knowledge was also a god from another dimension, and even the god of light was a god from another dimension. This was because his predecessor, the sun god, was a god from another dimension. Later on he was assimilated by the material dimension. Strictly speaking, other than the gods born from the battle between the Lady of Silvermoon and the Lady of Night, as well as the gods from the native plane, the other gods were all gods from another world. They came from another world and took root here. The easiest target to harvest in the undead disaster was the god of Lich. He also had a trace of the power of a mage. But to harvest his head, one had to face another god from another world, the goddess of death and magic. She came from another world and came here for some reason. At the same time, she was also involved in the battle between the gods of death. She was a goddess who was preparing to rise from mid-level godhood to greater godhood. Her relationship with Naruto was very strange. It seemed like they were cooperating but also seemed like they were enemies. These 2 mid-level gods both wanted to master the power of death and use it to rise to greater godhood. The goddess of death and magic. Soren knocked on his head and murmured, "This goddess is really difficult to deal with. But there is still a little time. The god of Lich seems to have fallen at the end of the year. He should still be alive now. Robbing the power of death. The god of Lich participated in the sneak attack on the king of the dead, Klemvox. He must have the power of death. Good news." Just when Soren was thinking, Gloria's figure came in from the door. She looked a little excited and said, "Mother just sent back the news. She has obtained the information about the core of the Mies. If she succeeds, she can bring the core of the Mies back in a month." The core of the Mies. Soren's expression was also shocked. He said in a deep voice, "That is to say, the island of Moder can rise next year?" Gloria nodded and continued, "It's not just that. The core of the Mies can provide far more energy than the elemental furnace. Even to some extent, the core of the Mies is a kind of almost infinite power. As long as it can be maintained, it can continue to support all the consumption of the floating city. Not only the rise of the city, but also the complete operation of the magic lock and the maximum energy shield. In short, if the elemental furnace was compared to an ordinary power plant, then the core of the Mies was a super huge nuclear power plant. Soren said seriously, "Tell your mother immediately. No matter what material and assistance you need, tell me immediately. The city of Motor will provide everything she needs." Once the core of the Mies was obtained, the city of Motor would have energy that could not be squandered. At that time, not only the most basic supply, but also other aspects of the city could be arranged according to Soren's requirements. Even if the energy was really as amazing as Gloria said, Soren could configure the city of Motor according to the standards of the Star Age. Energy was the foundation of everything. If there was endless energy, then the technology tree of Motor could directly usher in a super explosion. The core of the Mies would become the well of eternity of the city of Motor. P.S. Second update. That's all for today. Chapter 10-12. Motor City. Inside the Great Temple. As a black shadow appeared in the secret room in the center, 3 men and 2 women who had been waiting for a long time bowed their heads respectfully and said, "Lady Nightingale." The black shadow was a woman with a tall and beautiful figure. Her slightly pointed ears meant that she was a second-generation half-elf, which meant that her father or mother had a pure-blood elf. The half-elf assassin was wearing a large black cloak. She glanced at the others and said, "My lord has an oracle. The 5 of you will be sent to Sigil City to assist Lady Corinne. All actions will be at Lady Corinne's disposal. Do you understand?" 2 of the 3 men and 2 women were half-elves and the other 3 were humans. They belonged to the Inquisitors, assassins and shadow dancers who were responsible for dealing with unspeakable matters. They were the most elite group of people under Soren's command. More importantly, these people were given a trace of divine power and divinity. Nightingale was one of the best. She was more talented than other rogues. She was almost a natural assassin, and she had superhuman perception. Therefore, she was more favored by Soren and was given a status and strength far beyond others. To some extent, Nightingale was equivalent to half of Soren's chosen. Understood. The 5 of them knelt on one knee. Nightingale nodded with satisfaction, then said, "Come with me." The group walked through the winding underground corridor and then came to a spacious secret room. There were already many people waiting here. The rogues glanced at them and couldn't help but be slightly stunned because there were many high-grade witches in front of them. Nightingale said at this time, "They will go to Sigil City with you." The teleportation circle had been set up. The personnel for this operation was very professional. There were priests, rogues, wizards, warriors, rangers, monks and droll. The whole team reached more than 20 people, and all of them were high-grade professions. There were several legendary figures among them. As Soren's divine power became stronger, some of the talented believers who could access core areas such as slaughter and death also improved rapidly. The others present did not speak and the atmosphere was a bit dignified. As long as one was not an idiot, one would know that this operation was definitely not easy, and it must be very important. At this time, a man in a gorgeous wizard robe came in. "Lord Saruman." The others bowed their heads to show their respect, and Nightingale also bowed slightly. Saruman, who was blessed by divinity, improved his strength the fastest. Now he had the strength above legendary and was close to demigod. He glanced at the others as if there was a trace of divine power, and then he said, "In order to ensure the success of this mission, I will go with you. Let's go. Open the portal." Saruman took the initiative to participate in this operation. Although his strength increased quickly, his experience did not keep up. Saruman did not want to be an academic wizard, so he wanted to use this operation to train his ability. A legendary wizard was not easy to die, so Saruman wanted to use this operation as a trial. The wizard in charge of the preparation began to inject magic and locked the portal to Sigil City. Saruman was the first to step into the teleportation circle, and the others followed. After all of them were teleported away, Nightingale turned around and walked out. She still needed to report this operation to her master, Soren. In the tower, Soren's figure appeared behind Gloria and said slowly, "The first batch of people has arrived. The High Priest will send people to support soon. If you need anything else, tell your mother to tell me immediately. I will find a way to send it to her." Soren was determined to get the Mies core. Whether or not Mordor City could rise this time depended on the success of Fallen Witch's operation. Soren was still a little confident in her because to some extent, Fallen Witch was more reliable than Gloria. She was a person who did not care about the means, and a place like Sigil City was very suitable for a woman like her who was ruthless enough. Gloria heard this and looked away from the crystal ball and said softly, "Mother said that this batch of people is enough. Sigil City can't have too serious a conflict, or it may alarm the Lady of Pain. She is trying to negotiate to get the thorium core." The survivors of the Arcane Empire seem to have divided into two groups. One group wants to stay in Sigil City and the other wants to return to the material plane. Mother said that she has more than 50% confidence that she can get the thorium core through negotiation. Return to the material plane? This was almost impossible. The material plane had been divided by the gods, and there were also the Northern Witches and the Wizard Alliance. These survivors of the Arcane Empire would not be of much use even if they returned. There were too many enemies to face. Soren nodded and said, "It's best if she can negotiate. I'll wait for her good news." As the evil god in charge of shadows, slaughter and death, Soren did not mind using other means to get all this when necessary. There were already a large number of high-level assassins in his church, which was enough to solve most of the problems among the mortals. South Coast. From the south of the City of Wealth to the north of Port Tylon, more than 120,000 coalition forces had gathered. This operation was led by the great Shadow Lord Soren, and even attracted the attention of many good gods. Because the purpose of this operation was to completely eliminate the undead near the south coast, and there were not many forces in the material plane that could gather so many professionals at once. This operation to encircle the undead was centered on the army of the City of Moder. Among them, the City of Wealth sent 8,000 troops, including a group of priests and a group of monks. Port Tylon sent 5,000 troops, including a group of priests led by an archbishop. The Church of Agriculture sent 1,500 troops, most of which were priests and droll. What surprised Soren was that this operation also received the response of the Lady of Silvermoon and the Goddess of Love. At the same time, a group of paladins under the Lord of Light also joined the battle. However, these paladins did not like to stay with them. Instead, they chose a route alone and prepared to cut into the army of the undead and kill the lich who was responsible for controlling the undead. These paladins brought the legendary weapon, the Star of Day. In order to cooperate with Soren's operation, the Northern Tower also sent a group of witches. At the same time, because of the call of the god Soren, some adventurers also responded to his call. First of all, Soren's legend in the material plane was very high. Many adventurers worshipped him very much, and many of his rogue followers gathered spontaneously. Finally, the undead calamity itself was a threat to all living beings. The outbreak of the undead calamity put the adventurers in a very dangerous situation. There were also those whose loved ones had died at the hands of the undead. In the end, these people elected a person called Nord as their leader. The number of people gathered was also around 10,000. The army of Raging Sand Island had advanced to the city of Bernard. The army led by the half-elf First Mate had encountered the first wave of undead troops. It was a group of ghouls driven by hunger. They had been spreading along the south coast to hunt, attacking any living thing that could be eaten. The ghouls were the vanguard of the undead army. They moved faster than the skeletons and there were a large number of ghouls. When more evil ghouls began to appear, the army led by the half-elf First Mate began to settle down, waiting for the other troops to arrive, as well as the allied forces from the Principality of Rossard. In order to deal with these undead and to restore her reputation, Mrs. Duke of Red Dragon even personally negotiated with the rebels in the Principality of Rossard. In the end, both sides reached an agreement to target the undead first. After all, no one wanted the whole kingdom to become a paradise for the undead. No matter who won, they could only get a ruin. The Duchy of Rossad's rebel army only had around 30,000 soldiers. The Duchess of Red Dragon had put everything on the line and managed to gather around 100,000 soldiers. In a battle of this level, the role of the militia was very small. If they used human wave tactics to fight against the undead army, they would only drag themselves into the quagmire of dealing with the resurrected undead. Mordor City in the study. A tall half-elf woman entered carefully, then whispered, "My lord, the army on the south coast has begun to move. Lady Adele Isabella has encountered a group of necromancers. They found this on the enemy's body." After that, the beautiful half-elf believer sent a special emblem to Soren. Skull and sickle. This was a very eye-catching and very special emblem. Soren took a look and frowned, murmuring, "Naruto." Sure enough, it was him. The spread of the undead disaster was very fast. It had only been about a month since the outbreak. This was a barren medieval civilization background, and the communication roads were seriously backward. Only the intervention of the evil gods could cause the disaster to break out so quickly. Soren took a look and threw the emblem back to the half-elf in front of him. Then, he pondered for a moment and said, "Give this emblem to the Church of Glory." At the beginning, Naruto was just secretly manipulating the situation. Now that the king of the undead, Clemvox, was seriously injured by him and his whereabouts were unknown, Naruto was now standing on the stage ready to launch the undead disaster. He was the abhorrer of life, enemy of good, messenger of darkness, and reaper of flesh and blood. A god of death with intermediate divine power close to great divine power. And his strength was probably 30% stronger than Soren. Such an enemy was not something that Soren could deal with alone. Since the other party had even sent out his own believers and priests, Soren felt that it was time to help him draw a wave of hatred. Chapter 10:13. For the gods, secretly manipulating something and directly sending out their believers to participate in it were two different situations. The god of death, Nero, had even sent out his own believers. That was equivalent to laying all his cards on the table and challenging the gods. Basically, most gods did not accept the undead as believers, and Naruto's favorite thing was to end lives and resurrect the undead. At least 30% of his believers were high-level undead, 50% were half-undead monsters, and the last 10% or 20% were half-dead living people. Naruto was an absolute supporter of those who did evil for their own pleasure. In Naruto's cold view of the world, everything was the same. For him, all living creatures were a great insult to him, the god of death. On the contrary, all dying creatures were sparkling with green and black sparks of joy, and he liked these sparks. Some people did not pray to Naruto devoutly, hoping to obtain Naruto's power. Most of them were given death as a reward by Naruto. Because few people were tolerant of Naruto's priests, they often acted in secret and independently. Except in places where evil was everywhere, there was almost no organized Naruto church. Because there was no hierarchy, the independent small churches often had internal conflicts. Moreover, the god of death was still the object of fear here, and evil people were also afraid of the god of death. When Naruto's priests did not need to disguise themselves, they usually wore rusty red robes. If their behavior was discovered, they would move to a new place and continue to hunt. Some of them lived a traveling life and pretended to be kind people, appearing in one town after another. Naruto's temples were usually hidden. Even in places where evil was everywhere, they were usually built underground, usually part of the underground tomb. Most of the temples kept undead creatures and other creatures that spread death or created death, such as banshees and demons. If we want to stop the undead disaster, it seems that we can't avoid facing Naruto head-on. Soren frowned. To be honest, he was still a little afraid of Naruto. No god would have absolute confidence in defeating the Grim Reaper. He stood still in thought for a long while before muttering, "Naruto has a lot of enemies and he himself is also an otherworldly deity. If we want to deal with him, we have to borrow the power of other gods. The god of light is the first target. He will not allow Naruto to end all life in the material plane." Of course, Naruto did not have the ambition to go against the pantheon. What he wanted was death, a large number of deaths and the end of a large number of lives. In the end, he could directly advance from middle divine power to great divine power. However, if one were to simply rely on death to advance, this number would be extremely terrifying. If Naruto wanted to successfully advance, at least half of the mortals in the material plane would have to die. This was a bit of the bottom line of the gods. The gods had not made a move yet. On one hand, they were not strong enough to defeat Naruto. On the other hand, they did not dare to fight against the Grim Reaper. On the other hand, the powerful ones did not want to provoke an enemy. It's not enough to rely on the god of light alone. We have to find an enemy for Naruto. The gods were actually very selfish. In the face of such a tough battle that threatened their own safety, not many were willing to stand up first. Soren thought and muttered, "Who else can stand up against Naruto? The goddess of suffering, Ilmet? The goddess of the forest, Marikai? The silver moon, Surin?" There were only a few in the human god system. The possibility of the elven god system making a move was hard to say. The orc god system was even harder to estimate. The dwarf god system had always been unreliable. The halfling god system was not bad, but their racial bias was too obvious. If the halfling was not in danger, those gods would not make a move. Right. Soren seemed to have thought of something and murmured, Naruto is so high profile. If I were Sirik, what would I do? For a moment, Soren began to think in another person's shoes. Sirik was the god of murder. His clergy was special. If he wanted to recover, there were only so many targets to choose from. Soren, Vivian, Clemvox, Naruto. Compared to the city of Mordor, which was far away in the outer islands, Naruto, who had obviously attracted the attention of the gods, was more obvious. If Soren was Sirik, Naruto would definitely be his target. Basically, as long as he took the power of Naruto, Sirik could recover his original strength. Maybe I can lure the snake out of its hole. All the clues were inextricably linked together. At present, it was just a matter of who could not help but make a move first. Soren was very patient. He had no particularly dangerous enemies at present, so he could quietly wait for Sirik and Naruto to make a move. But at this time maybe he should throw out some bait. Come. Soren thought for a moment, waved his hand, and a black shadow appeared in front of him. The shadow knelt down on one knee and said, My lord, what can I do for you? He took out a document from the desk and handed it over. Let the assassins act according to the arrangement on this document. If you find anything unusual, tell me immediately. Yes. The black shadow bowed and left. The mining of the diamond asteroid was on the right track. It was estimated that it would take 3 months to finish mining. The bottomless abyss had consumed too much energy to attack the kingdom of fear. At present, the demon incarnation was constantly recruiting. It was estimated that it would take more than a month to reassemble the demon army. Thaling, who was in the mechanical realm of Nirvana, had begun to make advanced golem factories. It would take about half a month to complete. Gloria's research progress was still continuing. Alice was busy making puppets. Fallen, which was still working in Sigil City. The War of the Undead on the south coast was in charge of the High Priest. Unless there was a true god involved, Soren was not ready to go personally. In this way, Soren also had a rare buffer time when he was in Mordor City. He decided to use this time to teach Vivian how to become a new god. Although the little girl was very smart, she was still too young after all. Vivian did not have Soren's data on her body. At present, it would take her a whole day to deal with the prayers of the believers. In fact, other gods did not have much time to appear. The reason was that a lot of energy was consumed in responding to prayers. At present, Vivian's church had about 30,000 people. Because of the integration of everything in the Church of Fear, the number of Vivian's believers was about 200,000. Among them, the proportion of Pan-believers was very high. But even so, the number of prayers that Vivian responded to every day was very large. Pan-believers prayed once every 3 days on average. Devout believers prayed at least once a day. Fanatics prayed at least 3 times a day. Vivian's believers in the material plane alone had to respond to more than 30,000 prayers every day. Then, the petitioners in the kingdom of gods would also pray. At present, there were more than 1 million people in the kingdom of fear, which meant that Vivian responded to at least 1 million prayers every day. Although not every prayer had to be fully responded to, devout believers and priests had to respond to divine gifts. Even if they processed 100 divine gifts in a minute, they could only process 6,000 divine gifts in an hour. One could only imagine how much work Vivian had to do. What Soren had to do now was to teach the little girl how to quickly respond to divine gifts, which required some mastery of divinity. At the same time, Soren's own strength should be improved. There were many kinds of divinity powers that gods could master. At present, Soren had the ability to change space, change size, Death's Hand, change reality, change form, Divine Shield, Regional Divine Shield, Divine Shock Wave, Regional Divine Shock Wave, Language Proficiency, Character Proficiency, Cross-Plane Communication, Astral Teleportation and Plane Teleportation. Vivian, on the other hand, had even fewer godhood abilities. This was the biggest gap between them and other gods, so now Soren had to shorten this gap. If I want to improve to the standard of a normal mid-level divine power, the divinity powers that I still lack are Avatar, Destructive Strike, Creation of Magic Items, Creation of High-Level Magic Items, Divine Acceleration, Divine Creation, Divine Spell Specialization, Divine Spell Resistance, Divine Spell Penetration, Automatic Arcane Casting, and Absolute First Strike. In the study, Soren listed out the divinity powers that he needed to master one by one. After thinking for a while, he murmured, Avatar must be mastered first, then Destructive Strike. Divine Acceleration is equivalent to Time Stop, and finally, absolute first strike, needs to be mastered. Avatar was a very powerful combat ability. Destructive strike was equivalent to a crushing attack, and divine acceleration could replace time stop. These were all abilities that Soren needed. But Soren thought for a while and said, automatic arcane casting is equivalent to a legendary or above accidental spell. It's also a very important ability. He thought for a while. Then Soren listed out the divinity powers that he needed to help Vivian master: divine spell specialization, divine spell penetration, automatic arcane casting, arcane proficiency, divine shield, and change reality. Seems like Vivian still has a lot to master. Unlike Soren, Vivian was a pure spellcaster, so the divinity powers prioritized spell casting. He thought for a while and decided which abilities Vivian needed to master the most, and then he thought about how to teach these abilities to Vivian. The growth of a god was very slow. Under normal circumstances, it would take hundreds of years to master these abilities, but now Soren could only give it to the little girl. Because if they were to fight against the Death Pantheon, Vivian would have to adapt to the battle between gods. Chapter 10:14. The morning light shone on the city of Mordor. The pale golden light shrouded the great temple, and Soren's figure was sitting on the throne. The power of faith was constantly flowing into his body. With the rise of a dazzling golden light, Soren's figure suddenly shook, and then he suddenly stood up with a happy smile on his face. I finally succeeded. The power of faith poured into his body like a flood, and then a golden mark was left on his divinity. This was an extremely important divinity ability. Only this level of divinity ability could leave a mark on a god, because this ability was called Avatar's Descent. Deity's Descent, divinity ability. A special divinity ability possessed by gods with intermediate divine power and above. When Deity's Descent is activated, immunity to all Circle 1 to 8 spells increases with divinity ability. Increases all resistances by 10 points. When activated, immunity to instant death, charm, control, energy drain, and other negative statuses. Temporarily increases strength by 10 points, dexterity by 5 points, constitution by 5 points, and an additional 300 points of temporary HP. After activating Avatar's Descent, divine power will continue to be consumed. Avatar's Descent. This was one of the signature abilities of a god. If it was a god with great divine power, after activating Avatar's Descent, they would be directly immune to all spells from level 1 to level 9, which meant that only legendary spells could work. This divinity ability was not only very effective against other gods, but it also formed a complete crushing effect against mortals. That was to say, the effect of human wave tactics would be sharply reduced. Spellcasters below legendary level could basically ignore them. This was also the reason why many gods had fallen in the Avatar's crisis, but very few mortals could kill a god with intermediate divine power. Avatar's Descent was a very difficult divinity ability to master. Unless it was a combat-type god, some gods might not be able to use it even when they reached the level of great divine power. The golden light began to shrink into Soren's body. When he stood up, the whole temple had returned to normal. He calmly listened to the prayers of the believers and slowly said, "Now I have a little more confidence in fighting against the god of death." South Coast. The operation of cleaning up the undead in Mordor City continued, but as the intensity of the battle gradually escalated, some terrible creatures also appeared. The ghouls and ghosts had now become cannon fodder. The ones that were really difficult to deal with were the necromancers and skeleton lords. The traces of liches had also begun to appear frequently. Although the army of Mordor City was advancing step by step, the casualties were increasing. At the same time, the Duchy of Rasad's army also suffered heavy losses. Faced with such a huge sea of undead, there were only two ways to defeat them. One was to kill the high-level undead, and the other was to destroy all of them. The former was very difficult, and many liches had the ability to see through stealth and liked to hide behind the army. However, because of the Lord of Glory's army of paladins, the number of liches that had fallen so far had reached 5. All of them had died under the godly weapons, and even their phylacteries had been shattered. It seemed like the god of light was truly enraged this time. He injected his divine power into the morning star. When he killed the lich, he directly connected it to the phylactery and destroyed it. This was a method that only the gods could use. At the same time, Naruto's believers were increasing. The actions of the undead kings were often coordinated by Naruto's believers. Many of his priests were constantly resurrecting the undead, ending their lives and bringing death to the material plane. The smell of death in the material plane was getting stronger and stronger. Although Soren did not know where Naruto was, he knew that Naruto was most likely preparing for his promotion. Promotion to a great divine power. The number of deaths in Mordor City had exceeded 20,000. Relatively speaking, there were also hundreds of thousands of casualties among the undead. More than 150,000 ghouls had been permanently killed, and even the necromancers could not resurrect them. In the kingdom of God, the oracles from another world, led by the ugly monkey, were very busy. This time, the casualties brought a large number of heroic spirits to be reincarnated. Soren was the mastermind behind everything. In order to make up for the consumption of heroic spirits in attacking the kingdom of fear, he had transformed more than 25,000 petitioners at the cost of the army in the material plane, and the number of heroic spirits reached about 70%. Because most of these believers who died in the battle were professionals, many of them had the potential to be transformed into low-grade heroic spirits. With the army advancing step by step, the undead army was still retreating. During this time, they had brought tens of millions of casualties, destroyed hundreds of towns, and almost wiped out more than 30% of the population on the south coast. Soren did not know the situation in other places, but the casualties were probably higher than on the south coast. Because this time, even the Elven Kingdom could not be spared from the disaster of the undead. With the consumption of the ghouls as cannon fodder, most of them were civilians who starved to death and were directly transformed. The undead could not form an effective attack by relying on the skeleton soldiers. At this time, the horn of Mordor City's counterattack was completely blown. Mordor City. In Soren's study, the shadow of the high priest appeared and said, "My lord, the undead on the south and west roads have been cleared. The believers are very tired." Although victory has encouraged their fighting spirit, death is also consuming their fighting spirit. I suggest ending this battle as soon as possible because there are enough heroic spirits in the kingdom. The number of casualties reached more than 30,000. To Soren's surprise, only 20,000 of the 30,000 people entered his kingdom. It seemed that the proportion of people who believed in God was not small. He nodded and said, "Yes. Since the number of heroic spirits has almost recovered. Then inform Gloria to get ready to end the battle." This was a harvest. It was like a shepherd harvesting his flock. After Soren harvested enough souls, he was ready to end it all. With his order, the guards of Mordor City immediately operated quickly. The witches under Gloria began to gather, and with the sound of hurried footsteps, more than 10 airships began to rise. Below the arcane tower, the purple crystal that stored energy emitted a dazzling light, and with the activation of the teleportation circle opened one by one near the Lion Plain on the south coast. Activate the battle command. Activate the first Clay Golem Combat Legion. Activate the battle command. Activate the third Clay Golem Combat Legion. Activate the battle command. Activate the 7th Clay Golem Combat Legion. Dong dong dong. Heavy footsteps sounded below the arcane tower, and the activated golem puppets walked out of the underground storage room silently and walked toward the teleportation circle under the control of Thaling. At the same time, on a battlefield full of blood and bones, a white light suddenly appeared behind the army of Mordor City, and then a portal opened and a golem with a faint red light came out of it. 1, 2, 3, more and more golem puppets appeared, and they gathered in silence, and then rushed toward the undead army from the side. There was a burst of cheers. In the cheers of the army of Mordor City, more than 1,500 golem puppets arrived. They advanced quickly with the cooperation of the witches and directly cut into the undead army of more than 100,000. The lowest challenge level of these golem puppets was above level 5, and they could completely crush the low-level undead. Especially the steel golems among them, the low-level skeleton soldiers could not even break their defense, and the ghouls could only leave shallow scratches. The golem army easily crushed these undead, opening a passage for the witches in the rear, and the necromancers hiding behind also appeared in front of everyone. Lion Plain. The appearance of the golem army completely changed the battle situation, and as the coalition army approached, a high-grade undead hidden in the rear finally could not help it. The smell of death filled the air. As the darkness spread, a necromancer holding a huge scythe appeared on the battlefield. A believer of Naruto. He prayed for Naruto's divine power and used himself as a medium to become his temporary incarnation. Mordor City in the Great Temple. Soren watched all this silently, and when Naruto's incarnation appeared, a smile appeared on his mouth. Finally, can't help it? Golden light emerged. Soren's shadow rose from the temple, and at the same time on the battlefield thousands of miles away, the saint priest Milan knelt on one knee and prayed devoutly. A golden beam of light fell from the sky, and at the next moment, a faint golden light appeared in Milan's eyes. Summon the oracle from another world. Milan slowly stood up, waved his hand and opened two portals behind him. Then two gray-winged god emissaries appeared on his left and right. Group courage. Group power bestowal. Shadow realm. The radiance of spells spread out along with the aura. At this moment, Saint Priest Milan seemed to have been deified, affecting the battlefield with a power that didn't belong to mortals. She looked at the front with a cold expression. Then, in the shadow realm, she disappeared instantly, and the next moment she appeared directly inside the undead army. The golden divine power turned into two sharp blades, and Milan floated like a ghost. Every time she passed, several high-grade undead were killed. Even the lich could not compete with her power. Often at the moment of being killed, the lich's phylactery hidden somewhere would be directly broken by some powerful divine power. The black scythe of the god of death struck. With a crisp collision sound, the incarnations of the two gods fought for the first time. Bottomless abyss. The third floor. The forgotten land. Behind the Golumba arena was an active volcano all year round. Now a wide passage had been dug out by the Hezru, directly connecting to the magma layer inside the volcano. A team of demon guards guarded in front of the gate. Through the gate was a group of succubus in revealing clothes. Behind the gate was a huge pool with hot magma flowing in it. The temperature here was unbearable even for demons, but at this moment, there was a huge black shadow sitting cross-legged in the middle of the magma pool. The blazing flame shrouded it, and the wide demonic wings moved gently in the magma. Suddenly, an excited roar sounded, and then a huge figure of about 8 meters high rose from the magma. An endless amount of flame power surged toward the figure, and the blazing flames completely enveloped it. One could only see a terrifying shadow that was full of pressure. The huge figure waved its hand, and a burning sword appeared, followed by a flame whip that was more than 50 meters long. The terrible heat melted the rocks, and the pressure of the Lord-level demon enveloped the whole volcano. The Baler, leader, Sauron slowly walked out of the magma. His body size at this time was very amazing. His bare chest showed terrible muscles like steel. The wide demonic wings were almost 15 meters wide, looking like huge dragon wings. He had leveled up. Sauron, who had successfully evolved into the form of the Baler, leader, was nearly 8 meters tall and weighed more than 7,000 pounds. His huge body size did not affect his movements. Even if he had evolved into a super-large otherworld creature, Sauron's dexterity was still as high as 25 points, and his strength had increased to a terrifying 40 points. The Baler had two forms. One was the large otherworld creature, which added 30 points of basic HP. Each creature level had an additional 30 points of HP. The other was the large otherworld creature, which was the evolved form of the demons. The basic HP was 60 points, and each creature level had an additional 60 points of HP. And now, Sauron had evolved into a large otherworld creature. With the successful evolution of the Baler, leader, his HP directly exploded to more than 1,500 points. Chapter 10-15. After the battle in the Divine Kingdom of Fear, Demon Lord Sauron finally ushered in the most important evolution. There were two forms of demon evolution. One was to change the nature of the demon, such as evolving from a berserk demon to a berserk demon. The other was to continue to advance in the original form. There were two ways to advance. One was to take on other professions and the other was to change the basic form. This kind of advancement was very huge for the Balers, including the Balers. The profession advancement of the Balers was mainly beheader, executioner, and so on. The form advancement was from large otherworld being to super large otherworld being. The latter's improvement was even greater, because after the Balers were promoted to super large otherworld being, it was equivalent to adding the leader template. The super large otherworld being Balers had twice the life base of ordinary Balers. Once the evolution was completed, the Balers could completely crush the giant dragons in terms of vitality. Let's take the red dragon, the most powerful of the chromatic dragons, as an example. A baby dragon's basic HP was 8 points, A baby dragon's basic HP was 12 points, a juvenile dragon's basic HP was 15 points, a young dragon's basic HP was 20 points, an adult dragon's basic HP was 24 points, an adult dragon's basic HP was 27 points, and an old dragon's basic HP was 30 points. In other words, the basic life of the Balers was equivalent to an old red dragon. The basic life of an old red dragon was 33 points, the basic life of an ancient dragon was 36 points, the basic life of an ancient dragon was 39 points, and the basic life of an ancient dragon was 41 points. The ancient red dragon was only 41 points. According to the strength of the bloodline, the ancient red dragon was at least 41 points. The highest was uncertain, but there should be a lot of 50 or 60 points. At present, after evolving into super large otherworld being, Demon Lord Sauron's basic life was 60 points, which directly surpassed most of the ordinary ancient red dragons. Now, Demon Lord Sauron's attributes had changed. Name Sauron. Race, Demon. Form, Balers, Leader, Grade 6, Super Large Otherworld Being, Plane Crossing, Evil, Level, Creature Level 27 Attributes, Strength 40, Agility 25, Constitution 35, Intelligence 25, Wisdom 25, Charm 25. Alignment, Lawful Evil. Note, other demons will be slightly hostile to your actions. Health, 15121512 Demonic Energy, 8506100000 Domain, Massacre, Frenzy, Evil. Skills, Sneak 285, Deception 325, Negotiate 215, Literacy 270, Intimidation 370, Spellcraft 220, Use Magic Equipment 220, Listen 215, Detect 225, Search 190. Abilities, Aura of Fear, Flame Body, Flame Whip, Burning Explosion, Bind, Demon Claws, +1 Natural Magic Weapon, Demon Skin, Damage Reduction +10, Demon Resistance, all resistances +10, Damage Reduction 15 Boss, Night Vision 60 feet, Resistance to Electricity, Fire, Poison, Acid and Cold Resistance 10 points, Magic Resistance 30 points, Telepathy 300 feet, Truth constant. Abilities, Advanced Dual Wielding, Advanced Attack, Multi-Attack Weapon Mastery, Beheading Sword, Exotic Weapon Mastery, Long Whip, Super Fierce Attack, Super Whirlwind, Super Cleave. Spell-like abilities, Soul Manipulation, Telekinesis, Blasphemy, Dominate Monster, Advanced Dispel Magic, Order. Intimidate, Evil Aura, Advanced Teleportation, Dominate Demon, Summon Demon, Telepathy, Summon Demon Army, Firestorm, once a day, Implosion, once a day. Hot magma slid down from the Demon Lord Sauron's body. Accompanied by a strong pressure, he slowly walked out of the palace. The succubus maids on both sides knelt down, looking at him with eyes full of fear and greed. These succubus maids had never seen such a powerful demon before. The strong masculine aura and power made these succubus maids unable to control themselves. They longed for a certain liquid from Sauron and believed that this liquid could give them the power to advance. Although these succubus maids tried their best to show off their voluptuous breasts and slim waists, Sauron didn't even look at them at this moment. He walked directly into the barracks with the demon guards. Advancing into the Baler, leader form had increased his power rapidly. Not only could he deal with the abyssal demon dragon entrenched in this level, but he could also deal with the Gnoll army. However, before this, Sauron needed more intermediate demons to enrich his army. The blood pool he controlled was not enough to meet the consumption. He needed more souls to hatch the abyssal demon worms and then transform into demons. Master. Groups of demon guards knelt in front of Sauron. The demon goblin leader rushed over as soon as he heard that Sauron had come out. Sauron glanced at his subordinates. The demon hunters acted as his personal guards, and the other demons stayed in the barracks. His realm of order brought a slight change to these demons. At first, they were much more restrained in their territory. Only when they went out would they show the chaos and brutality of demons. Souls. More souls. With the great increase in the strength of the demon incarnation, a crazy idea emerged in his mind. The souls in the bottomless abyss were limited. Although the abyssal blood pool would constantly transform the abyssal demon worms, the main body of the souls was still the river Styx. The huge number of souls was not much after being distributed by many demon lords. That was why the profession, Soul Stealer, was created. Now the order of the underworld was gradually collapsing. As a powerful evil god, Sauron naturally had the idea of getting his hands on the souls of the underworld. Many undead lords had entered the material plane. Not only the souls of the underworld, but also the places that were connected to the underworld had a large number of souls that could be plundered. As long as these souls were taken back, they could be turned into worms through the abyssal blood pool to replenish Sauron's army. This was a relatively dangerous operation. But if it was successful, not only could it greatly weaken the power of the undead lords, but it could also reduce the pressure on the material plane. The underworld has death's servants. It's not a very good place. Sauron's alarm clock flashed through countless knowledge of the other world. Planes and half-planes were filtered one by one. Finally, a place appeared in his mind, skeletal wilderness. A half-plane between the spiritual world and the underworld. The leader is a powerful skeleton lord. If I can plunder this half-plane, I can get at least 1,000,000 souls. The undead also needed souls to be resurrected. The river Styx grafted the entire interior of the multiverse. Many evil gods, devils, demons, and undead all cut off souls from the tributaries. If Sauron could take down such a half-plane, he could directly create an army of hundreds of thousands of demons. And more importantly, many high-level undead had entered the material plane. This was a very good opportunity. As a demon incarnation, Sauron could bring a large number of demons to the rear of the undead. As long as he succeeded, he could cultivate hundreds of thousands of demons. The divine power of death was dissipating. In front of the divine priest Milan, the undead priest in front of her gradually shattered. The fire of soul in front of her disappeared along with the light of divinity. Soren won. Naruto seriously underestimated his strength. He thought that an ordinary incarnation could compete with Soren's divine priest, but reality gave him a heavy blow. Not only did one of Naruto's chosen die, but he also lost 3 divinity points. However, this failure would also remind Naruto of Soren's strength. Perhaps next time he would not send an enemy of this level to die. The golden light dissipated. Soren's shadow disappeared from the divine priest Milan's body. The battle around them was about to end. The death of Naruto's priest made the undead gradually lose control. Soren did not need to intervene in the next battle. Those mortals were enough to deal with it. Motor City. Soren's original body stood on the tower and murmured, "It seems that Naruto's strength and mine are only 3 to 7. The gap had been calculated in the battle just now. Soren's divinity and godhood were not as good as Naruto's, but he was basically immune to the special ability of the godhood of death. The other party was an enemy who was promoting to a great divine power. It was impossible for Soren to fight against him alone, but it was not completely without the power to fight back. If he really wanted to fight, Soren had about a 30% chance of winning. However, this chance of winning was still too low. If I want to deal with Naruto, it's best to use the power of other gods. Vivian is a fighting force, Princess Royal is also a fighting force. Gods with low divine power can basically be ignored. It must be a mid-level divine power. Soren thought and murmured, "Where is Clemvox? And the goddess of magic? She hasn't shown up for such a long time. Is she really going to lurk until the end of the Avatar crisis?" Soren, who was meditating, suddenly felt something. Then his figure disappeared, and the next moment he appeared on the sea dozens of miles away. A dazzling woman wearing a gorgeous robe and jewelry with skulls as decoration appeared in front of Soren. A faint divine light shrouded her. "Nice to meet you." The woman in front of him nodded slightly to Soren and said slowly, "Dear Lord of Shadow, the goddess of magic and death, Verges." Although the two sides met for the first time, Soren recognized the identity of the other party in an instant. The visit of the goddess surprised Soren a little, but he nodded and said, "Hello. The goddess of magic and death, Verges. A god from another world." She was also an outsider, a god from another world. Soren was a little surprised that the other party would find him. He was full of vigilance, but he did not do anything else. Lord of Shadow. The goddess of magic and death seemed to feel Soren's vigilance and said directly, "The world you are in is being ravaged by death, which is not a good thing for any god. Not all gods of death are as extreme as Naruto, who believes that life must end immediately. I came to you to seek an opportunity for cooperation. As a god in charge of magic and death, I can't stay in this world for too long. So I hope to get an opportunity to advance from this world before I leave. And you, as a god in charge of the power of shadow and slaughter, obviously need a temporary ally to break through. Maybe we can try to cooperate. By the way, I seem to have found the trace of the king of the dead, Clemvox. He seems to be in a bad state. Maybe you can try to replace him." The goddess of magic and death, Soren's weakness seemed to be caught by the goddess of magic and death. Chapter 10:16. Soren narrowed his eyes slightly. If Gloria were here, she would definitely be able to guess that Soren was thinking and was already a little tempted. But Soren still couldn't trust the god in front of him. Not only because of her identity as an outsider, but also because of the death and magic in her clergy, which conflicted with Soren's. Soren thought for a while. Then he slowly raised his head and said, "Your proposal is very interesting. But I'm sorry, I'm not going to cooperate with you. And for a new god, rashly challenging the king of the dead isn't a smart thing to do." The expression of the goddess of death and magic, Verges, gradually froze. She had imagined that Soren would make all kinds of requests, but she didn't expect him to directly reject her. She couldn't help but ask, "Why? Because I'm a god from another world?" Soren shook his head and said, "No. It's because I can't completely trust you. And trust is the foundation of all cooperation. Besides, with the current situation, it's not the time to deal with the king of the dead. Even Naruto couldn't kill him after so long of preparation. It's not easy to completely replace him." The goddess of death and magic Verges was surprised. "You know all this?" Soren smiled and said, "The gods wouldn't be ignorant of this. Unlike your world, this world has already experienced a catastrophe. With the example of the fall of the three death gods, the gods are able to restrain themselves." The goddess of death and magic, Verges, was silent, but she wasn't ready to give up. Instead, she said, "What can I do to make you believe me?" Soren pondered for a moment and said, "Tell me your real purpose of coming here." The goddess of death and magic, Verges, was silent. Her expression was hesitant, but then she shook her head and said, "I'm sorry. I can't say it because if I say anything related, it will attract the attention of the other party. I can only say that I came to this world to seek an opportunity to advance to a great divine power. There is almost no conflict of interest with you, and I can help you advance to a great divine power in this world. You're a new god with great potential. But the Avatar crisis is just the beginning. With the end of this crisis, the power of the gods will be reshuffled. At that time, you will have to face more than just the gods of this world. The Pantheon will be a bigger challenge. If you don't have enough strength, even the gods will encounter all kinds of problems. Why do you think the orc gods can enter this world? Isn't it because the native gods aren't powerful enough that a part of this world was carved up by the orc god system?" Speaking, the goddess of death and magic, Verges, the goddess of death and magic, and then disappeared into the sea. After hearing her words, he couldn't help but be. Because they had spread in this plane for too long, many people regarded the orc gods as the native gods, but in fact they were outsiders, gods who entered the material plane after the Battle of the Gate of the Orcs. In addition, there were the Mohan gods, the desert gods, and the dinosaur gods. Not all the gods could gain a foothold in the material plane, and some had gradually disappeared in history. The Pantheon was the real big stage. After the end of the Avatar crisis, Soren needed to occupy a chair in the Pantheon in addition to returning to the Kingdom of God. The Avatar crisis had reshuffled the power of the gods, and the competition for the material world might lead to a new struggle between the gods. She was right, Soren did need to be a great divine power to ensure his status. "I can't even say my name." Soren's figure returned to the city of Moder and murmured, "It seems that the goal of the goddess of death and magic Verges is very likely to be a great divine power. A great divine power could already obtain a very high status and control in a plane. If what Verges, the goddess of death and magic, wanted to do was related to a great divine power, then the difficulty would become very amazing." According to Soren's guess, this goal was very likely to be related to Verges, the goddess of death and magic, and it was likely to be a god above her. A god from another world. Soren pondered and murmured, "When should I go to other material planes? As a god from another world, I can fight if I can win and run if I can't win. Anyway, I don't have to worry about the consequences. Is it possible that they will chase me to this material plane to beat me?" Why was Naruto so fearless? It was because Naruto was also a god from another world, and this material plane was just one of his strongholds. The god of death, Nero, wantonly launched the undead disaster because his core belief was in another world. Even if he offended a large number of gods, as long as he did not fall, he could just return to his original world and start all over again. It was like a war between two countries. One was fighting in one's own home, and the other was fighting in someone else's home. These were two completely different concepts. Soren had more and more concerns, and he couldn't kill gods as casually as before. What? It was because of the Motor City, the foundation of the South Coast, a large number of mortal believers, and many people who served and followed him. Soren couldn't completely ignore these people. If he overdid it, the enemy would vent his anger on these people. However, if it was in other material planes, he really didn't have any concerns. The bottomless abyss. The third floor. The forgotten land. The barracks of the Golumba arena had been expanded more than 3 times, and there were many more demons here than before. The night witches herded batches of abyssal worms forward on the wide granite road. These hideous worms with human faces were herded and hunted by the night witches from the wilderness. They were going to sell them to the demon merchants in the Garuba arena. Tall buildings rose from the ground. The demon goblins drove the berserk demons to carry heavy stones. The buildings here were basically more than 10 meters high because the height of the demons was already amazing. Some hell worms were mixed in. As the Golumba arena became more and more famous, many Yugros who smelled business opportunities came. Not only were there worms from other planes, but even the souls of the Bator Inferno were smuggled in. The most popular goods here were souls, weapons, and gems. There was a legend that the lord here, Sauron, was like a dragon. He liked to collect all kinds of gems and strange stones. It was said that these things were stored in his treasury. Golumba arena sold a large number of weapons. The quality was much better than the demons and the price was cheaper than the demons. The demon merchants would use the souls and gems they brought to exchange for these weapons, and then sell them to other places in the bottomless abyss. The third floor was a good transit station. It was far away from the location of the Abyss Blood War, and there was the river Styx leading to the lower levels. Now this town ruled by demons was glowing with a different prosperity. At this time, in the deepest part of Golumba arena, a tall black shadow came to the lava pool behind the barracks. Master. Rows of demons burning with raging flames knelt down to the Baelor, leader, Sauron. These were the demons he cultivated. At first there were only some fire demons, but with the war in the Kingdom of Fear, some of the fire demons began to evolve. When a new flame demon appeared, it meant that Sauron's plan was successful. Baelor, leader. The word leader not only represented Sauron's strength, but also his own combat power as a leader. It also meant that Sauron had the ability to create Baelor demons. If the fire demons he cultivated had not evolved into flame demons, he would not have been able to get the power of a leader so easily. This was a feedback ability from the plane. Baelor demons were one of the species closest to the original demons, and they had always been the most powerful demons, second only to the lords. The demons outside were all cannon fodder. Sauron really needed these more powerful Baelors to be able to run rampant in the bottomless abyss in the future and help his main body in the war in the kingdom of God. One by one, the fire demons stood up from the lava pool. Sauron used his blood as a medium to awaken many souls. Nearly half of the souls eventually died and were twisted, and the other half with potential were transformed into fire demons. At present, Sauron had a total of 127 fire demons. The war in the divine kingdom of fear had cultivated 5 flame imps and some flame imps elites. Now that Sauron had become the leader of the Baelor flame imps, what he had to do was to continue to expand the scale of the flame imps and train more flame imps. General of the Burning Legion, Archimonde, salutes you, my master. With the fluctuation of the lava, a flame demon about 5 meters tall walked out. He knelt down on one knee towards Sauron and said, "More of my kind are being transformed. Those dissipated souls have become nourishment. It is estimated that a new fire demon will be born in a month." Transforming a fire demon not only required a lot of souls but also an active volcano. Sauron was now accumulating numbers. The focus of the demon hunter had shifted to the kingdom of God. In order to cultivate new combat power, he was ready to directly cultivate a flame demon army. These souls alone were not enough. The growth of a flame demon required a lot of energy, and there was only one place in the entire abyss that could provide this energy. That was the Abyss Blood War. Now the intensity of the Blood War had been reduced a lot. Sauron was now waiting for an opportunity, a suitable opportunity to launch a blood war. As long as he won, he could directly cultivate a group of flame demons. Let the flames purify everything. As the leader of the Baelor demons, Sauron was looking forward to the arrival of his flame demon army. Chapter 10:17. Time quietly approached November. As the army sent by Sauron cleared most of the undead on the south coast, the refugees gathered near the city began to return to their homes. The Temple of Agriculture took the opportunity to expand the scope of believers. The priests of the goddess of agriculture and the Droll began to distribute winter wheat seeds to the refugees for free, and then settled these people in the land around the Wind Spear Hills. Because some cities had been destroyed, Adele Isabella also suggested that Soren expand the size of the territory. So the Wind Spear Hills annexed the territory of 3 nearby cities, and the area expanded by about 500 square kilometers. Most of the original nobles in these territories died in the undead disaster. The surviving bloodlines were all collateral branches, and they were not qualified to compete for the right of inheritance. Similarly, with Soren secretly backing her, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife also began to attack the nobles in the Principality of Rossard. The undead had been forced hundreds of kilometers away, close to the edge of the halflings' territory. The necromancers gave up this land and began to walk death in other places. Their task was to walk death in order to collect the power of death and help Naruto and the undead kings to level up. After this disaster, the population of the south coast had been reduced by about half. The rest of the population was almost under the protection of the big cities, so they targeted other places. For example, the Shire area, which had been almost unaffected from the beginning until now. The halflings were well protected by their gods and had not been affected much so far. But for the undead, they did not have so many concerns. The race of halflings was their next target. At the same time, in the outer islands of Mordor, the city hall began the 3rd census because of the approaching new year. The census of Mordor was conducted almost every year, but this year was a little different. Under the arrangement of Soren, the high priest began to conduct a census of the number of believers in the church. Because of the help of the witches, the whole process of the census was very fast. A few days later, Soren got a document. Very good. Soren looked at the statistics and couldn't help but smile. You did a good job. The population of Mordor City grew rapidly. Now, with the population of Treasure Island and other nearby islands, the total population of Mordor had reached about 400,000. This was mainly because Soren had completed the city's planning. The housing and farmland were enough to support the huge population. This number was still increasing. It was expected that the population of Mordor City would reach more than 600,000 next year. According to the statistics of the city hall, many wealthy families from other places wanted to move to Mordor City to avoid the war. For this reason, the city hall received a lot of extra taxes. Next was the number of Soren's followers. This was a huge increase. At first, Soren's followers were mainly concentrated in the half-elves, but now he had about 300,000 followers in the city of Mordor. The half-elves who originally occupied the main position were now only 1/3 of his followers. This had a lot to do with Soren's dominion. Because of the prosperity of Mordor City, many humans had become Soren's followers, and this number was still increasing steadily. There are 300,000 followers in Mordor City. If you add in other places, there should be about 1 million followers. That is, if I advance to greater divine power, I won't be unable to bear the consumption. Gods couldn't advance randomly. If there was not enough followers, blindly advancing would only make one enter a period of decline. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 1 million followers to maintain a greater divine power. If there were not so many followers, then the power of the god would decline little by little, and eventually decline back to intermediate divine power. Similarly, if the number of followers was enough, even a god with intermediate divine power would slowly advance. It may take hundreds of years to reach the level of a greater divine power. The expansion of Mordor City ensured the number of Soren's followers. That was to say, he now only needed to make up for the divinity and divinity value to become a greater divine power. In fact, it proved that Soren's initial layout was correct. If he didn't build Mordor City, he would have to rely on priests to spread his followers slowly like other gods. It was a very slow process. It was impossible without hundreds of years. The Realm of Bones. This was a half-bit wall between the spiritual world and the underworld. It was born more than 3,000 years ago, and its creator was said to be a demigod lich. In the long history of the multiverse, there were many powerful people who were comparable to the gods, and the demigod lich was undoubtedly the closest to the gods. Many demigod lich tried to get the power of a true god, but so far only the god of lich got it by luck. The mystery of the gods was not so easy, and the gods would not easily allow others to touch it. However, the legacy of the demigod lich was undoubtedly preserved, and that was the half-bit wall that he spent hundreds of years cultivating. Compared with other spellcasters, the demigod lich had enough time to squander, so this half-bit wall was already not small at the beginning of its birth. The half-bit wall would gradually grow over time. Therefore, there were more and more half-bit walls attached to the gap between the spiritual world and the underworld. In the end, it was almost the size of a small principality. Over the past 3,000 years, the realm of bones had gradually stabilized. Due to the death of the demigod Lich, the demiplane was getting closer and closer to the underworld. In the end, it was attached to the underworld just like the moon orbiting the earth. Therefore, this half-bit wall also became a place where the undead lived. The underworld was the territory of the death god system, and many powerful undead were unwilling to rely on the underworld, so they could only gather in these half-bit walls. For a long time, this half-bit wall was controlled by a powerful winter ghost. This winter ghost was the creation of the demigod Lich, and it had terrible strength. But later, this winter ghost was killed by the death god's servant, and a powerful skeleton lord took over this place. He called himself the Skeleton King. But in fact, almost no one cared about his title because basically every powerful skeleton lord liked to call himself the Skeleton King. The outbreak of the undead disaster caused this skeleton lord to covet the souls of the material plane, but he was cautious and did not send out all of his troops, but kept some of them to guard this half-bit wall, for he was afraid that others would rob this place. And today, under the gray night sky, near the edge of the half-bit wall, a blood-red portal opened. On one side was the gray territory of death, and on the other side was the dark red-hot plateau of the portal. Countless restless and excited demons appeared on the other side of the portal, and when the whole portal stabilized, immediately 2 secondary balers flew up excitedly and rushed directly into the half-bit wall. For demons, there was nothing more interesting than breaking out of the bottomless abyss and snatching other half-bit walls. P.S. There will be an advertisement for a game tomorrow. Slowly accumulate contacts and try to do something. Chapter 10:18. Groups of Hezru walked out of the teleportation gate. Unlike the demons in other parts of the abyss, the demon army that came out of the portal was more disciplined and not as messy as the other demon armies. Moreover, they were all equipped with excellent weapons. Although they were not as good as the elites of the demon army, they were basically magical weapons. Due to the high skin resistance of demons, most of these demons were not equipped with armor or were only equipped with part of the armor. Their bare chests were full of muscles with bulging veins, full of a sense of strength that mortals could not compare to. Behind the Hezru was a squad of 6-armed Marillion. These terrifying warriors were among the best in the abyss in terms of close combat ability. Any 6-armed Marillion could take on a small army by themselves. As the smarter demons, the Baler led the army. They split into 3 groups and advanced forward. This time, almost all of the demons that came out were intermediate and advanced. The inferior demon cannon fodder was not worthy of being teleported to the battlefield of other planes. The last group that came out of the portal was a group of flaming demons. There were 7 or 8 Balers mixed in with them. Then the demon lord, Sauron's figure, appeared behind them. This was the demon army that came from the Galumba arena. Sauron's strength was not enough to compete with the archdevils for souls, so this demi-plane controlled by the undead was within his range of plunder. There was a rule in the lower planes. Ever since the river Styx ran through the multiverse, the lords of the lower planes loved to steal souls from the river Styx. The servants of death and the oracles could only ensure that the souls of the more devout believers would be returned to the river Styx. However, the souls of the non-believers would mostly float along the river Styx before being distributed by the servants of death. This gave the lords of the lower planes a chance to reach out. Master. A tall elite succubus flew in front of Sauron. She smiled and showed her tall figure. Then she said, "There is a large group of ghouls in front. We should be close to the main camp of the undead." The faint sound of battle could be heard. Sorin nodded and said, "Let the Glabrizu and the Soul Judgment demons prepare. All the advanced demons prepare the soul assimilation spell." A team of demon elites flew out. As the place where souls were needed the most in the lower planes, the high-level demons of the abyss basically had a way to plunder souls. The Hezru at the front had already broken through the ghouls' defensive line, with some of the ghouls falling to their attacks. The Balers and Balrogs were picking out suitable enemies, and each time a legendary tier undead spirit appeared, it meant that they would swarm it, kill it and extract its soul energy. The ground of this half-plane was black. Some kind of poison had seeped into this land, and any food or water that mortals ate here could cause them to die. Some pale skeletons were exposed in the wilderness, and it was unknown when they had died. This plane was endowed with certain characteristics. The speed of decomposition of corpses was very slow, and the white bones would not decay so easily. On the contrary, it was easy for them to turn into skeletal warriors due to death and resentment. This was an ability granted by the undead monarch. They had transformed their kingdom into a suitable territory, and as long as that characteristic was not erased, they could constantly replenish their forces from afar. The undead did not have much intelligence. In the entire half-plane, there were millions of undead wandering. Among them, the low-level undead wandered in the wilderness, while the mid-level and high-level undead were incorporated into the army. They were responsible for guarding the Lord's palace, and most of the time they were in a deep sleep. They would only be awakened when the enemy appeared. A group of succubus maids dragged grayish-black soul crystals to Sauron. These were the spoils of war of the demon army. In the lower planes, the chances of a soul crystal dropping from killing enemies were not high, but if it was combined with spells, the chances would be greatly increased. Using the soul spell would definitely give a soul crystal. Very good. Sauron picked up a gray soul crystal and looked at it, feeling the energy in it, and said with satisfaction, "Continue to advance. Destroy the enemy. Destroy this place." Thousands of ghouls and ghouls were slaughtered, and the demon army advanced step by step until a towering fortress appeared in front of them. This was a fortress that had existed for thousands of years. At first, it was a lich's laboratory, but later it was transformed into a skeleton fortress by the winter ghosts. Finally, about 1,000 years ago, it was turned into a skeleton fortress by the undead monarch. The ground in front of them was pale white. Who knew how many skeletons were buried underground? And the air was filled with thick corpse poison. If it wasn't for the Devil Legion, the human army would have been annihilated here. But this was nothing to the powerful demons. They ignored the poison here and rushed directly into the skeleton guard army. About 300,000 undead were gathered here. This number was terrifying to humans because these skeletal guardians were all level 5 and above. However, this number was nothing to demons. The Baelor leader of the third layer of the abyss, Sauron. A low roar came from the fortress made of bones in the distance. A skeleton king about 5 meters tall appeared in the fortress and roared at Sauron, "Why did you invade my territory?" The pale fortress was mixed with the color of blood. For thousands of years, it had absorbed the essence of countless skeletons. A thick aura of death shrouded this place, and every once in a while, it would automatically awaken the undead. For the souls. Sauron looked at the enemy calmly and said slowly, "Because you are too weak. You don't deserve to own this plane." Kiki. Hearing Sauron's words, many of the high-grade demons could not help but laugh strangely. This was the demon's cold joke. Sauron explained a principle very straightforwardly, and these high-grade demons felt that it made sense. Since ancient times, there had been no shortage of clowns in the chaotic evil camp. Hearing Sauron's cold joke, there were even Hezru who slapped their buttocks with their backs facing the enemy and mocked him without holding back. Anger made the skeleton monarch's soul flame jump. He said in a low voice, "Do you think you will win? This is my territory. Wake up. My skeleton army. Destroy these arrogant demons in front of me." A blood-red light appeared on the skeleton fortress. The entire fortress was enchanted with powerful magic. When it was activated, the aura of death began to spread, and then the countless skeletons gathered underground were all revived. Millions of skeleton soldiers crawled out from the ground. Over a long period of time, countless skeletons had been collected on this land, and when the magic was activated, they were all revived. Only this much strength. A secondary Baelor scorned. He was a demon who had retired from the bloody war in the abyss. At this moment, he looked at the skeleton monarch in disdain and said in a low voice, "Master, this useless fellow is not worthy of your attack. Leave him to me." Millions of skeleton soldiers surrounded the demon army. But from the beginning to the end, not a single demon showed fear. On the contrary, most of them showed contempt. Compared to the undead, the demons were also experts in human wave tactics. Basically, every demon had experience in fighting one against many. And in the bloody battle in the bottomless abyss, millions of soldiers were nothing at all. Any local conflict would have more than hundreds of thousands of demons. There were more than 600 levels in the abyss. These demons had basically experienced large-scale battles. At this moment, they did not feel anything when they saw millions of skeleton soldiers. "Berserker demons charge," Baelor ordered in a low voice. Thousands of berserker demons waved their heavy weapons and rushed over. Although it was still a little chaotic, at least a formation could be seen. These Hezru with over 25 strength and over 2,000 pounds of weight pushed forward, crushing the skeletons in front of them effortlessly. Meanwhile, a group of 6-armed Nagas were like monsters. They wielded multiple weapons at the same time, and any one of their whirlwind slashes could easily take out over a dozen enemies. This small group of 6-armed Nagas took out thousands of undead with just a single charge. Assassin demons lurked in the darkness. They quietly approached and aimed at the necromancers in the rear. As legendary demons, they were born to be top-notch assassins. Flaming demons and Balrogs also gradually joined the battle. They were like the turrets of the demon army. Every attack would bring about a violent explosion. Sauron did not have any room to attack in the entire battle. He sent out more than 30 legendary demons this time, and they completely killed their way into the skeleton fortress. As expected, Sauron thought to himself. Although the abyss has been defeated by the demons because of the chaos, it is still the most powerful force in the lower planes. A group of beautiful succubus maids surrounded Sauron. Since the battle did not need a demon lord like him to fight, the witty succubus naturally seized this opportunity to curry favor with their lord. Succubus maids surrounded Sauron, trying to use their fullness to rub his body to attract Sauron's attention. There were already hundreds of succubus in the Golumba arena. Every succubus wanted to collect the essence of their lord, and there was a leader-level succubus lady boss above. If they did not seize the opportunity, they did not know when they would succeed. The demon army rushed into the skeleton fortress. In order to show off in front of Sauron, 3 Balrogs, an elite 6-armed Naga, an elite soul judgment demon, and an elite assassin demon all tried to kill the skeleton monarch in front of them. Demons were basically unreasonable, so under the siege of 8 legendary demons, the skeleton monarch did not even have a chance to fight with Sauron before it was killed by the assassin demon. Spirit summoning. Sauron stood up at this time, pushed away a large group of succubus that was a little annoying and headache, and personally extracted the soul, then said, "Destroy this place. Collect the scattered souls and take away all the soul crystals." P.S. Many people know that playing Undefeated Legend and getting Durex. Considering the fact that there are single people, I call today to suggest whether the officials can add the Rubik's Cup award. Chapter 10:19. With the end of the battle, the succubus began to count the spoils. As a smarter demon, the succubus was used by Sauron as part of the brain. As for the other demons, it was not that he didn't want to use them, but there were very few middle and low-grade demons with brains. As for the high-grade demons, they had other tasks. Most of the high-grade demons were not willing to accept this position. They liked to join the battle as a commander instead of counting the casualties of the cannon fodder. In contrast, the succubus, who liked to use their brains and sit on their own, was much more useful. They didn't like to fight head-on, but they liked to have some power. The statistics of the spoils and casualties came out. After Sauron captured this half-plane, he had obtained about 50,000 soul crystals and several warehouses of other rare resources. There were not many gold and gems because the undead didn't need them. However, the number of necromancy casting materials was huge. Sauron took half of these spoils, which was about 25,000 soul crystals. The rest of the soul crystals were to be rewarded to the demon soldiers. Otherwise, they would definitely not buy it next time. There were also unspoken rules in the abyss. In a plundering war launched by a demon lord, the demon lord's spoils could not exceed 70%. More than this number, the high-grade demons below would be dissatisfied. Of course, compared to other places, the demons were still relatively evil. Sauron took half of the soul crystals and spoils, and the other half was mainly given to the high-grade demons as rewards. However, after going through the Golumba arena, these things would eventually be returned to him. Master. A mature and beautiful succubus came to Sauron's side and threw a flirtatious glance. Then she said, "This time about 5,000 demons died. Most of them were berserk demons and Hezru demons. The first batch of spoils has been sent back by Sir Angad. These little bitches only knew how to seduce him all day long." Sauron ignored the flirtatious glance and nodded. "Very good. Let the secondary Baelor Caters continue to clean this half-plane and collect souls and spoils. I'll leave him a demon army of 10,000. In any large-scale battle, it would be strange if the demon casualties were less than 20%. The demons that died were basically brainless and liked to charge forward alone. For example, berserk demons and Hezru demons. These demons were too deeply infiltrated by chaos and had a high death rate in every battle. They were completely high-level cannon fodder. However, if they died, they died. These kinds of demons could be replenished very quickly. Sauron also needed to eliminate them in order to cultivate a demon army that would listen to his command. The first batch of demons began to return. However, there were still many places in the demi-plane that had not been cleaned up. Sauron left behind a secondary bailer while he led the army back. This was a perfect plundering battle. To the demons, any plunder would be a perfect plunder as long as the casualties did not exceed 50% and they won. They would be happy and look forward to the next plunder and destruction. Bottomless Abyss, Third Layer, Forgotten Land. Just after returning to the Golumba arena, Sauron came to the abyssal blood pool. In the demi-plane of the undead, in addition to the soul crystals, there were also many souls imprisoned. These souls were thrown into the blood pool by Sauron. Soon the blood pool began to bubble. Then, new abyssal worms crawled out of the blood pool one after another. The mother of worms gradually approached. After Sauron occupied this place, the mother of worms, which was close to the strength of a demigod, had surrendered. It guarded against other demons from approaching and protected these abyssal worms until they became dretches. The souls of mortals could only be transformed into abyssal worms, and most of the soul crystals came from the dead professions. Sauron selected a batch of less powerful soul crystals and threw them into the blood pool. Then, some stronger abyssal worms crawled out. These abyssal worms would grow quickly and quickly evolve into demons. In the end, they would most likely transform into berserk demons and Vroks. 3 days later, collect all the demons here. After doing all this, Sauron said to the demon guard next to him, "No one else is allowed to come close. The transformed abyssal worms will be transported every 3 days." The blood pool was the core of the source of soldiers. The strength of any abyssal lord was measured by the number of blood pools they controlled. A blood pool would give birth to new demons every day. If one did not rely on the blood pool and only collected slaves from the wilderness, it was essentially the same as those night witches who herded abyssal worms and sold them. A demon lord who only needed to buy abyssal worms from night witches and ghosts would be looked down upon. Golumba Arena inside the fortress. Another batch of higher quality soul crystals appeared in Sauron's palm. These were the core of the undead steel, the souls from Styx and the servants of death. A small blood pool appeared in front of him. But unlike other blood pools, this one was directly connected to the magma pool next to it. Plop. Sauron threw a gray-black soul crystal into the blood pool, then bit his fingertip and injected a drop of blood into it. With the boiling bubbles, the figure of an abyssal worm quickly emerged, and then it changed into the appearance of a dretch. However, the form was not stable and it quickly continued to advance. Demon lords could use their power to directly promote low-grade demons. Just like Sorin's Slaughter EXP, demons needed soul energy to advance quickly. The form of the newborn demon gradually stabilized. If Sauron stopped, a middle-grade demon would be born. But what Sauron needed was not a middle-grade demon. He waved his hand and put the middle-grade demon that was about to take shape into the magma pool. Soon there was a painful scream. Create fire demon. Sauron's blood was awakening the potential genes of the middle-grade demon in front of him. Through the magma pool, if successful, a fire demon would be born in the flames. However, it seemed that this time it failed because the demon in front of him quickly turned into charcoal. Another one failed. Sauron did not look frustrated but put another soul crystal into it. The transformation rate of a fire demon was much lower than that of other demons. Under normal circumstances, only 1 out of 3 promoted middle-grade demons could transform into a fire demon. Sauron transformed about 30 times a day, and on average he could transform about 10 fire demons a day. This transformation required at least a bailer to complete. When the other bailers grew up, Sauron could let them transform the fire demons. Soon the second soul was formed. The body of the demon transformed by the blood pool was very successful. At the moment when it was ignited by the magma pool, it did not make a painful cry, but roared excitedly. Then a fire demon burning with fire came out of the magma pool and knelt on one knee toward Sauron. "Master." Sauron nodded and said, "Take him down." A successful demon would lose most of its memories, but its instincts and a few memories would be retained. Any successfully transformed fire demon would have direct combat power. The whole transformation process continued. Sauron transformed more than 100 today, but the success rate was still about the same as before. Only 1 out of 3 successfully transformed into a fire demon, and they were basically all transformed by middle-grade soul crystals. The proportion of these fire demons that could be promoted was about 1/10. After many battles, less than 1/10 of the fire demons could be promoted to become fire demons. Sauron needed a bloody battle. Only a complete victory in a bloody battle could quickly produce a batch of flame demons. Night fell. Sauron returned to his palace, and groups of succubus maids were already waiting inside, looking at him expectantly, hoping to be favored. However, Sauron was not interested at all today. He still had a very important thing to do, which was to send a portion of the high-grade soul crystals back to the material plane. Mordor City needed these soul crystals to make diamond golems. Mordor City. Sauron was busy preparing for the production of the diamond golem factory, and today bad news was sent to him. The Falcon Kingdom was destroyed? Sauron frowned as he looked at the information in front of him and said in a deep voice, was it really completely conquered by the undead? The south coast was under his protection, but other places were not so lucky. The Falcon Kingdom was located in the southwest of the continent. It was not a small kingdom, and there was a church of the noble goddess. The noble goddess, Sinwold, was a weak god. Her church was not strong, but it was not weak either. But now the whole kingdom had fallen, and the church of the noble goddess was almost wiped out. This was the first time the church of the gods had been hit so hard by the undead. At the same time, an evil name also spread in the material plane. Sazastan. The leader of the Red Robe Wizards, the evil demigod Lich, led the undead army to destroy the Falcon Kingdom and gathered a group of Red Robe Wizards to try to rebuild Tori's kingdom. Sauron pondered and murmured, the Red Robe Wizards have also come out. Then the undead Oro should also make a move soon. The god of Lich seemed to have fallen after the undead Oro appeared. Then Sirik appeared. Because of the phylactery, the god of Lich was not so easy to kill. Even if the gods in the original book destroyed his body, the god of Lich would find a way to be reborn. Only Sauron, Sirik, and those who inherited the power of the three gods of death could directly kill the god of Lich. He was one of Sirik's targets, and the time of his fall was after the undead Oro appeared. Looks like it's time to start. Sauron pondered for a moment, and then a little bit of divine light separated from his body, and then an identical Sauron appeared. P.S. By the way, on the 28th, which is tomorrow's beta test of Undefeated Legend, the Futu army is preparing to enter the Wei Kingdom in the sun-chasing area. My sock puppet is still Futu. This time I want to see if I can really get the Rubik's Cup. This is a game that does not require experience to level up. My name is Futu. Chapter 1020. Sauron was planning something. But while he was plotting something, the Queen of Spiders, who was far away in the Underdark, also began to move. The evil goddess began to tighten the giant net she had woven and gradually targeted the main god of the elves. The anger of revenge had been accumulating in her heart for a long time. She was so eager to take revenge on her former husband, the main god of the elves, Corlan Larishan. The Avatar Crisis was a stage. The first to appear on this stage was the human god system, because humans had the largest number and were most widely distributed in the world. But with the transition of the Avatar Crisis, the gods of other races began to gradually appear. Shortly after the outbreak of the undead, a god system that was not very rare in the material plane began to gradually appear. That was the dwarf god system. Dwarves were popular craftsmen, alchemists, and inventors. Although their technology was recognized, most dwarves still liked to live with their own kind in comfortable caves under the hills where animals were abundant. Dwarves liked animals, beautiful gems, and all kinds of jokes. They had a sense of humor and loved puns, jokes, games, and even pranks. The more complicated the design, the better. Fortunately, dwarves were as invested in craftsmanship as they were in pranks. Dwarves liked to ask questions and discover things through personal experience. Sometimes they were reckless. Curiosity made dwarves skilled engineers because they were always looking for new ways to build things. Sometimes, the gnomes would set up a prank just to see how the others would react. This was a group of naughty little guys. Many people would mistake them for halflings, but in fact, halflings were much taller than dwarves. Dwarves were only about 1 to 1 meter tall and weighed between 40 and 60 pounds. Their skin color was dark brown to wood brown, they had blonde hair, and their eyes were different shades of blue. Males liked carefully trimmed short beards. Dwarves usually wore clothes of animal skin or earth tones, with intricate embroidery or delicate jewelry. Dwarves reached adulthood at about 40 years old and could live up to 350 years old, but some could live up to 500 years old. This was a long-lived race. Because of their individual strength and height, dwarves did not often walk in many cities. They only liked to deal with dwarves and halflings, and they got along quite well. Only a small number of gnomes would leave the settlement and go to human cities, and these gnomes were often more dangerous. Because of some wars in the past, many humans had never seen a gnome in their entire lives. Only in the territories of dwarves and halflings would they encounter one. The dwarves didn't like the visit of humans, and the halflings had closed off the Shire. Therefore, since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, there was not much news about the dwarves. Gnomes lived in the wooded hills of the southeast. Although they lived underground, gnomes went out to breathe fresh air more often than dwarves and enjoyed outdoor activities. The dwarves hid their homes with ingenious architectural structures and illusions. Only welcomed visitors would be guided to the bright and warm caves, and those who were not welcomed would not be able to enter. They liked to use illusions to disguise their homes. The main god of the gnomes was Garzhanjin, a main god who grew slowly over time. His history was as long as the birth of the gnomes. Grey Feather Hills. This was one of the territories of the gnomes. They only occupied a small part of the material plane and did not leave their land much. However, these gnomes had escaped the first few Avatar crises, but after the outbreak of the undead disaster, they still suffered a lot of impact. But these were not the most important things. The more important thing was related to a god. He was Shiguzin, the great earth caller, gnome god of death and nature. As mentioned before, many of the clergies had long been divided, and the clergies of different races were given the power of some new gods. After a long time, the gnomes also had their own god of death that was Shiguzin, the great earth caller. He lived on the edge of the underworld in the lower plane, and was responsible for assisting Klemvox in managing the dead, but he was mainly responsible for the souls of the gnomes. This was a god with mid-level divine power. Shiguzin, the great earth caller, mastered the clergies of earth, nature and the dead. These were all very powerful clergies, and they also allowed him to successfully advance to mid-level divine power. At this moment, near a gnome village in the Grey Feather Hills, a dense crowd of undead surrounded the place. The gnomes did not have many big cities. They lived relatively scattered, and the temples of the gods were mostly at the level of temples. This village worshipped Shiguzin, the great earth caller, the gnome god of death and nature. In the darkness, a pair of unruly eyes watched everything. These resurrected undead surrounded the place. Unlike other undead, they were directly controlled by a powerful demigod lich. The power of death. Cyric silently looked at the village in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Destroy this place. I want to seize the power in the temple." "Yes, master." The demigod lich nodded and retreated. Soon the undead launched a crazy attack. Without any support, the gnomes in front of them were defeated, and soon hundreds of them were killed. The fall of the entire village was only a matter of time. About half an hour later, this gnome village was sacrificed, and then all the gnomes were killed and resurrected as undead. Cyric's figure appeared behind the undead. Compared to when he first broke out of the seal, he was much stronger. At least, he had the power of a weak divine power. He came to the temple of the village and then entered the temple alone. Soon, the brilliance of the temple gradually dimmed, and the power of death gradually disappeared, as if it was swallowed by some existence. There were only 2 temples in the whole village. One was dedicated to Bar Ivan, the shadow cloak, gnome god of spies, and the other was dedicated to Shiguzin, the great earth caller, gnome god of death and nature. Master. Just as Cyric walked out of the temple, a hazy shadow appeared. This was a promoted assassin, and the most terrible assassin had the ability of permanent invisibility. They were promoted by the god who held the clergy of murder, and were endowed with the special ability of permanent invisibility. They were also once the core members of the Cyric Church. The assassin approached quietly, knelt down and said, "We have found traces of Bar Ivan, the shadow cloak. But we also found traces of Garrido, the iron hand, gnome god of war. They seem to have appeared together near the Grey Feather Hills for some reason." Cyric turned his head and laughed as if he was sneering. He said, "The gnome god of war? So the gnomes have a god of war. Continue to monitor their movements. When my power recovers a little, I will kill them all." According to normal thinking, Cyric's target should not be the gnome god system, but the human god system of death. However, Cyric held the clergy of conspiracy. He did not know why, when he targeted the human god system, he always had a kind of uneasiness, as if he had fallen into a conspiracy. In the end, he decided to follow the instinct of the clergy. Although Cyric was crazy, he was not an idiot. His intuition told him that if he targeted the human god system, he might fall into a conspiracy. Therefore, Cyric took advantage of this disaster of the undead and secretly controlled some liches to target an inconspicuous race. That was the gnomes who lived in the hills in the southeast. A divine system that was not very powerful, but had at least 3 or more gods as a target. More importantly, there was one more thing. So far, the gnome god Gar, Dazzling Gold, had not appeared. Sirik suspected that the gnome god was still in his kingdom and did not dare to come down. If the gods with great divine power were to resist desperately, they could hold on until the last wave of the Avatar crisis before they fell to the mortal world. However, doing so would consume more divine power. The harder they resisted, the weaker they would be when they fell to the mortal world. P.S. I still remember the ID photo update of a reader in Undefeated Legend last time. The game is in beta today. After I finish this chapter, I will enter the game to see if there is a similar ID this time. Chapter 1021. Under the cover of the night. A camp was hidden in the mountains and a group of gloomy-looking magi were gathered here. They had special emblems on their chests and used various disguises to protect themselves. Their true identities were members of the Dragon Witch cult. It was an ancient and evil organization. Its founder was Samaster, a chosen of the goddess of magic. He had some dealings with Elminster and once fought with Alistair, the city lord of Silvery Moon. It was worth mentioning that the former city lord of Silvery Moon was his lover. This terrifying sorcerer eventually went crazy and revived as a lich. In order to destroy this terrifying existence, hundreds of priests of the god of dawn, the former god of light, tried to stop Samaster, but they were forced into a corner by the powerful Samaster. Helpless, the priests sacrificed their lives to pray for Luoshander to descend. The god of dawn responded to the prayers of his followers and sent his avatar to destroy Samaster. Samaster's all-out attack only managed to break the skin of Luoshander's temporary body, but his own body was destroyed by Luoshander's attack. An existence comparable to a demigod lich was thus erased by the former god of light. However, the organization he created was preserved and maintained its vitality. Because of this, the Dragon Witch cult and the Dragon cult were created. As time passed, the members of this cult gradually got closer to the god of liches and maintained some contact with Naruto. They were also the most terrifying part of the undead disaster, because their mission was to revive the Dragon Lich. An evil aura pervaded the mountain range. The members of the Dragon Witch cult worshipped dragons but not living ones. Instead, they were transformed into dragon liches after they died. Samaster had recorded the secrets of creating dragon liches in his book, The Tower of the Dragon. Now, copies of this book were circulated among the members of the Dragon Witch cult. Rituals usually involved the cooperation of the evil dragon and the sorcerers of the Dragon Witch cult. However, it was said that the more powerful sorcerers of the Dragon Witch cult would also force the evil dragon to undergo this transformation. At this moment, in the depths of the mountains, an old blue dragon had been placed in a large magic circle. The transformation of a dragon lich was a very complicated process. It required many magic tools and expensive items. After the transformation, the Dragon Lich would form a cooperative relationship with the members of the Dragon Witch cult. They would act together against the enemy. A hazy silhouette arrived. Soren's avatar appeared in the mountains. He sneaked past the traps and approached the Dragon Witch cult's camp. As expected, it has already begun. The initial attack of the undead calamity relied on a large number of creatures to wear down the living beings. However, the ghouls and skeleton soldiers alone were unable to truly threaten the gods. To ensure that his plan was perfect, apart from the undead lords, Naruto also secretly supported the members of the Dragon Witch cult. He sent his priests to join them, secretly teaching them necromancy spells and using them to resurrect the Dragon Lich and the Bone Dragon. This mountain range was the territory of the Blue Dragon. There weren't many dragons in the material plane, but there should be at least a few hundred of them. The blue dragons occupied this land because it was close to the Gobi Desert. There were more than 10 blue dragons gathered here because there was a gem mine here. The messy goblins were scattered around the perimeter. The old blue dragon controlled these goblins and used the bugbears as guards to protect the periphery of the nest. He then controlled them to mine the gems here. The aura of death gradually gathered. At the top of a mountain, an evil spell was taking effect. With a low chant, a member of the Dragon Witch cult in a black robe brought a strange potion to the blue dragon. It was a bottle of deadly poison. It would kill an adult dragon in no time. The moment the potion killed the dragon, the spell circle would automatically activate and the dragon's soul would be injected into the phylactery. The birth of a dragon lich was terrifying. This creature had a challenge rating of 23 and above. Even normal Baylor demons wouldn't be able to defeat it. Disciples, cheer. The Dragon Witch cult member who seemed to be the leader said excitedly, "Welcome back, our friend. The powerful dragon lich Durgos." As the blue dragon swallowed the potion, its life force quickly disappeared. Then the spell circle on the ground shone brightly. In Soren's vision, the soul of a dragon appeared and entered the phylactery. The power of death gathered. The blue dragon's body decayed at a speed visible to the naked eye and quickly turned into a half-skeletal dragon. Its flesh and blood dissipated with the spell, and the old blue dragon successfully turned into a dragon lich. A little bit of soul fire appeared in its huge eye sockets. It seems that they're very skilled at turning into a dragon lich. Soren silently watched all of this. At the same time, he calculated the strength of the last few waves of the undead calamity based on what he saw. The outbreak of the undead calamity was only the prelude. Currently, the resurrected were low-level undead and refugees who starved to death during the Avatar crisis. At most, they would be turned into skeleton warriors and ghouls. However, Naruto's goal was not these. As the first wave of the undead calamity ended, more powerful undead would gradually appear, and the Dragon Lich would be the most important one. Currently, there were many members of the Dragon Witch cult scattered throughout the material plane. They were either coercing or forcibly turning the dragons into dragon liches. Naruto's Grim Reaper's servants were assisting these people. Dragon liches could not only be transformed from pure-blooded dragons. According to Soren's memories, Naruto taught the Dragon Witch cult other methods so that they could even transform mixed-blood dragons into dragon liches. For example, old pterosaurs, wyverns, white dragons, and so on. The members of the Dragon Witch cult were mainly distributed in the east and north. The eastern desert was occupied by the evil blue dragon, while the cold lands of the north had a large number of wyverns and white dragons. Nero's church controlled a group of necromancers, and after using the undead to attract attention at the beginning, they had already begun to quietly prepare to revive the giant dragon. The War of the Dragons should be starting soon. Soren watched the old blue dragon in front of him completely turn into a dragon lich. He had no intention of doing anything because this operation was not for a dragon lich. He was looking for the god of liches. The War of the Dragons broke out in the late stage of the undead disaster. The outbreak of the war was mainly related to the Dragon Witch cult. Many pure-blooded dragons, especially those of the good alignment, could not tolerate the other party's resurrection of the dragon liches and desecrated the long sleep of the dragons. So in the end, even the dragon islands of other worlds had dragons joining the battle. However, the main force of the whole battle was still the good gold dragons and silver dragons. Most of them lived near the Elven Kingdom. This battle finally attracted a legendary dragon. It was one of the 3 legendary dragon species, the Power Dragon. This legendary dragon fought with Naruto head-on and did not die. It only escaped with serious injuries. Soren waited quietly. According to the information he found, the god of liches had encountered the goddess of death and magic not long ago. His body was destroyed by this otherworldly god. Although he was resurrected with a new body, his strength must have been affected. According to the information collected by Mordor City, his core followers were here. The camp in front of him was a secret gathering place of the Dragon Witch cult. In his previous life, it was a large dungeon that had destroyed many people, and there was a certain chance of encountering the god of liches. Soren estimated that there was a 30% chance that the god of liches would appear here. There were about 3 dragon liches, 1 legendary necromancer, 2 legendary mages of the Dragon Witch cult, and more than 100 members of the Dragon Witch cult. The most powerful one was the blue dragon lich that had just turned, and the other 2 were old subspecies of dragons that had turned into liches. Just as Soren was secretly observing everything, a sudden movement attracted his attention. Then, in Soren's perception, a beautiful mature woman with long silver hair appeared outside the camp. She quietly lurked and approached here, as if she wanted to spy on the situation of the Dragon Lich's camp. This is her. Soren seemed to have thought of something, and the corner of his mouth could not help but show a playful smile. He did not expect to meet an acquaintance of his previous life here, and it was someone who had been chasing after him for a long time. The reason was that after Soren came out of the Underdark, he was a little short of money, so he went to her nest to steal some valuable things. The mature woman with long silver hair used magic to cover her tracks, and then quietly bypassed the bugbear goblin that was guarding the camp. She did not realize that Soren was secretly observing her. She just carefully approached because her current form was not suitable for fighting, at least she could not use all of her strength. This evil aura. The mature and charming woman secretly observed the camp, and as if she felt something she murmured, "It really is a dragon lich. These evil guys are actually making dragon liches. No. This matter must be reported to others." Faint clouds lingered. The woman with long silver hair in front of him quickly disappeared, and then gradually retreated outside the camp. However, at this time a cold voice suddenly sounded, "Since you are here, don't be in a hurry to leave. Am I right?" Guess what I saw? A sneaky little silver dragon. How dare it lurk in our territory? A gloomy aura. A figure holding a white bone staff appeared, and looked at the woman in front of him with a playful gaze and said playfully, "Looks like we have one more material." This was the camp of the Dragon Witch cult. A large-scale battle with a challenge rating of around 25, where thousands of adventurers had fallen. Chapter 1022. Silver Dragon, Alexandrina. An adult dragon who lived near the Cloud Mountains. She had a group of maids made up of cloud giants. She liked to go to the human countries and was quite popular among the elves. In Soren's memory of his previous life, she was a mobile quest distributor in the middle of the Avatar crisis. As long as one was in the good camp, it was always easy to receive a variety of quests from her. Because this naughty silver dragon was a member of a hidden organization in the material plane, the Harpist. The Harpist was a very loose, secret and contradictory organization. Its leaders were unknown and its internal composition was very complicated. They were always hidden in the shadows, only at the critical point of the situation, and immediately disappeared into the crowd after completing the task. They fought against evil in some seemingly insignificant and even somewhat deviant ways, but the general good people did not understand them. Some people claim that we are spies and others think that we are nosy, dangerous people or unquestioning assassins. In fact, we are the collection of every characteristic of these people, if the situation proves that it is appropriate to do so. Non-evil people of any age, profession or race could become a harpist: humans, half-elves, elves, some halflings, dwarves and highly intelligent forest dwellers, such as forest fairies and centaurs. The first three accounted for the majority of the harpist. Most of these people were bards or rangers. Other professions also had a place, whether it was mages, thieves or priests. Droll was an ally of the harpist, but many priests were proud to be a harpist. This was a very old organization whose history could be traced back to before the last Avatar crisis. The harpist had existed as early as the time when the three gods of death were active. The harpist was once called the interference of the material plane, and deranged idealists, but in most cases they were a group of people who acted with good intentions. Alexandrina was one of the leaders of the Southern Harpist. She was keen to fight against evil forces and liked to release a variety of quests to adventurers. Soren once dared to steal some valuable things from her lair, and because of this he was on the Harpist's wanted list. This organization had weakened a lot, but it still had a lot of influence. Jianghu. A black mist appeared, and with the fluctuation of magic, a lich holding a silver-gray staff appeared in front of him. He looked at the silver dragon in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What did I see? Silver Dragon Alexandrina. Why didn't you obediently stay in the Cloud Mountain range? Why did you come here to die?" The high-ranking members of the Dragon Witch cult appeared one after another. They looked at Alexandrina with ill intentions. Evil Dragon Witch disciples. Being surrounded by so many fallen wizards, Silver Dragon Alexandrina's face did not look good. She said in a serious tone, "You actually dare to secretly resurrect a Dracolic. Other kind people would never allow such behavior." The harpist never lacked a sense of justice. Soren complained as he hid in the dark. As a member of the Grey Zone, he had suffered many losses from harpers in the past. But now that he was a god of the evil camp, those harpers did not dare to trouble him. However, these energetic fellows seemed to have set their sights on the Dragon Witch cult, which was a good thing. As long as the harpist knew about it, the goddess of the forest and ranger, Mei Li Kai, would not sit idly by. Of course, the premise was that the silver dragon in front of him could leave alive. Bone prison. Dimensional lock. Greater disjunction. The members of the Dragon Witch cult in front of him chose to argue with the silver dragon with a strong sense of justice or kill her and turn her into an undead. The battle was going in a very unfavorable direction from the beginning. The legendary wizards of the Dragon Witch cult sealed the space and then used disjunction to destroy the spells and items on the silver dragon. This was a very smart tactic because most of the silver dragons were very rich. When they turned into human form, they would prepare a lot of magic items for themselves. A dull roar was heard. Alexandrina decisively turned into her original form in the face of this unfavorable situation. The combat power of adult dragons decreased greatly when they turned into human form. Although the silver dragon could retain a lot of spellcasting abilities, she was definitely not a match for these people in front of her. A silver dragon about 15 meters long appeared in front of everyone. She had very beautiful silver-white scales as if they were one. The width of her wings was much wider than other dragons. There was a special divine glow on her body, which meant that Alexandrina was blessed by a god. Dragon's Breath. Facing the siege of the members of the Dragon Witch cult, the silver dragon Alexandrina chose the most effective tactic at the beginning of the battle. She took a deep breath at the beginning, followed by a dragon's breath, then launched a wing attack at the nearest target. There were not many creatures in the material plane that could compete with the power of adult dragons. Even the silver dragon, who was not known for her strength, was able to suppress the members of the Dragon Witch cult in an instant. However, this suppression could not last long because there was a limit to the number of times she could use her dragon's breath. Screams of agony rang out. Under the counterattack of the silver dragon Alexandrina, the members of the Dragon Witch cult were quickly killed. However, as soon as the dragon's breath ended, a counterattack followed. Accompanied by a spray of blood, a Dracolic rushed over and tore apart Alexandrina's beautiful scales, taking away a large piece of flesh. The wizards of the Dragon Witch cult immediately began to cast spells such as weaken, damage increase, and reduce resistance to continuously weaken Alexandrina's strength. Soren stood still in the dark and did not seem to have any intention of making a move. This silver dragon did not have any relationship with her, so Soren had to think carefully about whether it was worth it to expose himself in advance for her sake. However, at this moment, an evil aura appeared, accompanied by some kind of divine power that made Soren tremble. A strange item suddenly appeared in the hands of the Dracolic in front of him, and the next moment, a black flame appeared on the Dracolic's palm. This vicious flame instantly burned Alexandrina's body, causing her flesh to gradually wither and her dragon scales to shatter like fragile glass. At this time, Soren noticed that the Dracolic was wearing a crown under his cloak. This crown contained divine power and some kind of divine power that came from the same source as Soren's. This is? Soren's expression changed instantly and he murmured, "This is the aura of the King of the Dead, Mirko? P.S. The monthly ticket is about to expire. If you want, please vote again. Wait a minute." Chapter 1023. Part of Soren's power came from the three gods of death. Therefore he was very sensitive to the power of these three powerful evil gods. Almost as soon as they used some kind of evil black fire, he had a very strong feeling. What is this power? Soren frowned and stared at the member of the Dragon Witch cult in front of him. Under the terrible black fire, the silver dragon, Alexandrina's life force was rapidly weakening. It was as if the fire directly ignited her life and kept burning her life force. This power came from the former king of the dead, Mirko. It was a kind of fire from the god of death and had a terrible lethality to any creature, just like the famous silver fire of the goddess of magic. Soren seemed to have thought of something and said in surprise, "The horned crown. Crown off horns?" There was no doubt about it. Mirko of the three gods of death had definitely fallen. He died very early, and his divinity had long been inherited by someone else. Most of his power should have dissipated. Then, under the circumstances that he had already fallen, what else could exert his divine power? A divine artifact. And it must be a high-grade divine artifact. A divine artifact that disappeared from the material plane appeared in Soren's memory. It was a divine artifact that was obtained by a legendary figure and brought out of the material plane. The Horned Crown. This was a divine artifact that preserved part of the divinity and intelligence of the King of Bones, the former god of death, Mirko. It was a silver headband with a black diamond embedded in it. 4 sharp bone horns stretched out around it, and the inside of the diamond shone with a strange light. The horned crown was an evil item with self-consciousness. Its only purpose in existence was to constantly spread evil and pain. This divine artifact was an item that Mirko made a long time ago when he still had divine power. Although it was finally broken into pieces by the black staff, there was still some power left in these pieces. At the moment when Mirko was killed by Midnight, later the goddess of magic, he used his dying power to pass through the heavy defense around the Tower of the Black Scepter and recast the fragment of the horned crown. Then he poured his remaining divinity into it and teleported away. For a long time, the horned crown was very fond of controlling people to invade and destroy the Cyric Church and its believers, but it would try its best to avoid the allies of Kale and the Temple of Goddess Mistra. This divine artifact preserved part of Mirko's divine power. It contained the mysteries of death and preserved the evilest flames of negative energy of death. It could kill mortals directly, but it could also endlessly erode the lives of divine creatures. This divine artifact is still preserved. It was said that before Mirko died, Jianghu injected his last divinity and power into it. The power of death was very useful to Soren. If he could get this artifact and extract its power, he might be able to comprehend the divinity of death. Shadow Realm of Shadow. In the next moment, Soren disappeared. He did not intend to save the silver dragon Alexandrina in front of him, but he was determined to get this divine artifact left by the former god of death. Time stop. Regional divine impact. The silver dragon Alexandrina's injuries were getting worse and worse, and death seemed to be coming at any time. She couldn't help but recall her past. A young silver dragon flew at the top of the cloud mountains. Alexandrina felt that death was approaching. This made her feel very unwilling, so she prayed to the gods for help. The next moment, it was as if the gods had answered her prayer, because everything around her seemed to have stopped. A silver-white stream of light suddenly appeared. It seemed that in an instant, the Dracolic in front of her was split in half by some terrible force. This was a power that mortals could not imagine at all. She had never seen anything that could kill a Dracolic so easily. She thought it was the arrival of the goddess of the forest. But right after that, Alexandrina felt an even more terrifying and evil aura. Soren's figure flashed through space. After killing a Dracolic with 16 slashes in an instant, he set his sights on the other adepts. Divine Dispel. Layers of protective magic shattered like eggshells. Soren waved a silver-white stream of light and pierced into the Lich's body. At the moment of destroying the Lich's body, a powerful divine power crossed space and destroyed the Lich's phylactery with death. It seemed that only a second had passed. When Alexandrina's consciousness gradually returned, all the enemies in front of her had become cold corpses. And in front of this silver dragon, there was a terrible thin figure. Even just standing there casually, she could not help but feel her soul trembling. Evil god. A very terrible evil god. Although the other party didn't even look at her from the beginning to the end, Alexandrina felt suffocated and didn't even dare to move. Soren did not pay attention to Alexandrina behind him. He gently waved his hand, and a crown flew out from the wreckage of the Lich in front of him. At the moment when it fell into his hand, the crown trembled violently as if it was struggling, and there was some kind of strange scream. But all its struggles were in vain. Soren easily suppressed its power. Horned Crown. It was a high-grade artifact created by Mirko. It could grant the following abilities, has the same effect as the Lich's aura of fear. When resisting necromancy spells and magic effects, has 25 magic resistance. Has the same effect as a level 6 priest's ability to repel or command undead creatures. If you already have this ability can be stacked with your priest's level. Can cast unmistakable teleportation once a day, only limited to teleporting the wearer and his equipment. Death Aura. Can be cast once every 10 minutes, the range of influence is 40 feet cone. All creatures within the cone-shaped area must pass a toughness check of difficulty 20. Otherwise they will immediately die, and after 1d4 rounds, they will become bound spirits under the control of the crowns. If they pass the check they will only receive 3d6 plus 20 damage. This is the instant death effect of necromancy. Mirko's Hand. Once a day the wearer can cover one of his hands with black flames. Using these flames will be treated as a touch spell. When the wearer successfully uses a melee attack to hit the target must pass a toughness check of difficulty 25, or they will die immediately and become a spirit under the control of the wearer after 1d4 rounds. It was a high-grade artifact in the truest sense. It was a very terrifying item in itself. Mirko had injected the power of death into it. In addition to the terrible black flames, there was also a death aura that could be cast once every 10 minutes. Any creature that was killed would become a bound spirit. This was an artifact that could easily create an army of undead creatures. However, this high-grade artifact also had a curse that affected anyone who wore it. The wearer's alignment will immediately change to neutral evil. Unless Mirko agrees, the wearer cannot take off the crown. The only way to remove the crown is to wait for it to teleport away. The Horned Crown can cast suggestion on the wearer once a day, controlling the wearer's consciousness. The wearer will gradually become an undead creature under the 2-year-long curse. Every time the death aura and Mirko's Hand are used, The process will be accelerated for 1 to 4 months. When the transformation is complete, the wearer's appearance and creature type will become an undead creature, but he will still retain his normal abilities. If the horned crown leaves the wearer who has become an undead creature, the wearer will die immediately. The wearer will become very suspicious and will try his best to protect and keep the horned crown so that no one can take it away. When the horned crown is worn, all creatures within 100 feet of the crown must pass a willpower check, or they will be affected by the resonance spell. Mirko's remaining consciousness screamed in horror. He felt Soren's power and tried to escape, but there was no way. He had been suppressed by Soren's divine power. So this is the horned crown? Soren looked at the crown in front of him and said to himself, its ability is similar to the one ring that I made. He created 7 rings in the bottomless abyss. All of them were lesser divine artifacts and high-grade legendary items. They were also enchanted with suggestion and control spells. The effect was similar to the horned crown, but they did not have such powerful enchantments. Soren took a deep breath, then closed his eyes and felt some kind of power. He murmured, "Death." The remaining power of the divinity of death. It seems that I really have to thank you, Mirko. Then you can completely die now. P.S. Second update. The monthly ticket will expire in 6 hours. Those who have a monthly ticket can vote. Chapter 1024. The silver dragon, Alexandrina, stood rooted to the ground, not daring to move an inch. However, after suppressing Mirko's consciousness, Soren turned his head and looked at her. Then he frowned and said, "What are you doing here? Are you going to have a long talk with these members of the Dragon Witch cult?" Alexandrina swallowed her saliva when she heard this. Her heart finally calmed down. It seemed like the evil god in front of her had no ill intentions. Otherwise she wouldn't have survived until now. Alexandrina immediately got up and bowed. "Esteemed Lord of Shadows. I'll take my leave then." The silver dragon Alexandrina immediately spread her wings and soared into the sky, then flew out of the mountains. Soren turned around and shook his head. He then walked toward the camp of the Dragon Witch cult in front of him. Since he had already made his move, he had to eliminate the root of the problem. This camp must be completely destroyed. Otherwise it would easily alert the other gods. The dragons that he once had to look up to were now easily killed. After becoming a god, Soren felt that the world had become smaller. The entire battle didn't last long. Although many gods had fallen during the Avatar crisis, the power of a true god began to surpass that of mortals. Not to mention that Soren was an intermediate god. If they wanted to kill Soren, all the members of the Dragon Witch cult would have to work together, and they only had a 30% chance of winning. This was just the camp of the Dragon Witch cult. Other than the 2 Dracolics, there were only a few high-grade members. However, they brought Soren a lot of slaughter EXP and spoils of war. Soren obtained more than 5 million slaughter EXP and some legendary items. At the same time, he also used soul assimilation to extract the dragon crystal from the Dracolic's bodies. This was a very overbearing method that could easily offend the gods of the dragon system, because in this case the dragon's soul would be imprisoned as well. Motor City. At the top of the arcane tower, Gloria sat cross-legged in front of a crystal ball. The scepter of Savras was in her hand. Accompanied by a silver-white radiance, a little bit of divine power was extracted from it and gradually merged into Gloria's body. It was as if he had reached a critical point. All of a sudden, Gloria's long hair fluttered in the wind. Her entire being and the scepter of Savras glowed with divine light. Then the light on the scepter gradually dimmed, while the divine light on Gloria's body grew denser and denser. The power of prophecy enveloped Gloria's body, and a trace of the law that represented the gods gradually merged into her body. As if breaking through the boundaries of space, Gloria's eyes turned silver white. "Congratulations." Soren suddenly appeared on top of the tower. He stood behind Gloria and said happily, "You seem to have mastered the power of prophecy." Savras was the god of prophecy. At the same time, as the loser of the competition for the priesthood of sorcerers, she also held the priesthood of prophecy. Before obtaining this divine artifact, Soren had already erased Savra's will. Gloria herself was a master of prophecy, and now that she had extracted the power from the artifact, she immediately advanced. At this moment, Gloria had become a demigod of prophecy. "I think I saw something." Gloria turned and stood up when she heard this. She seemed a little tired as she muttered, The domain of the gods is too vast. I don't seem to be able to control this power yet. The priesthood of prophecy was merging into Gloria's body. This allowed her to use any prophecy spells, and she could see fragments of the future. This priesthood of prophecy was very difficult to master. As a mortal who had just advanced, Gloria encountered a problem that was even more troublesome than Vivian. It was even harder for her to control this power than Vivian. Don't be hasty. Soren reached out and hugged Gloria in front of him and said slowly, "You've only just begun. As you accumulate more divinity and divine persona, you'll gradually get used to this power. For now, put aside the matter of the arcane tower and leave it to Alice and the others. I'll use this time to teach you how to adapt to the power of the priesthood." Whether it was Vivian or Gloria, they did not have the help of the system. Soren could quickly adapt to the priesthood, but there was still a period of rejection, and he almost had problems with his mind. Gloria was in the same situation now. The prophecy allowed her to sense too much, but she could not control it herself. Soren had to help her stabilize her mind. This process could take up to a month. Fortunately, Gloria did not inherit too much power, or she would have to spend a long time in seclusion like Vivian to adapt to the divinity. Right. Gloria seemed to have thought of something and muttered, "I seem to be able to sense the structure of the weave. And I seem to have sensed the location of the goddess of magic. She's in the southwest of this world." Something had happened to the god of mages. When Soren obtained the scepter of Savras, part of the power of the priesthood of mages had been integrated into it. Gloria seemed to have received some of the power of the priesthood of mages, so her perception of the weave had become stronger. The goddess of magic is in the southwest? Soren thought for a moment and said, "Try not to use the prophecy ability for now. Wait until you've completely absorbed the power of the scepter of Savras and become a lesser god, then try to access the weave to obtain the priesthood of mages." Gloria nodded. Soren had entered the realm of the gods. Whether it was for herself or to accompany Soren, she had to gradually step into the realm of the gods. In the study, two Soren appeared here, but soon the other one gradually disappeared. A strange crown appeared in Soren's palm. He reached out and touched the crown in front of him, feeling it tremble. Then, a golden light of divinity appeared in his eyes, and in the next moment, a powerful domain of divinity enveloped the space. A majestic divine power rushed into the crown. The remnant soul of the former god of death, Mirko, let out a sharp scream, but it was mercilessly suppressed by Soren's powerful killing intent. The remnant soul of a god who had been dead for a long time could not stop him. As the divinity was extracted, some data appeared in front of his eyes. Discovered the divinity of death. Extracting energy. You have extracted the divinity of the high-grade divine item, Horned Crown. You have obtained 10 divinity points. You have obtained 5 divinity points. Domain of death upgraded. You have obtained the information of the priesthood of death. Ability upgraded. Your domain of death upgraded to the priesthood of death. The third notification of the priesthood of death appeared. When Soren had completely extracted the divinity of the Horned Crown, his domain of death became the priesthood of death. However, although he had the priesthood of death because this newly acquired ability was very weak, Soren did not extend a new divinity ability. The main reason was that the power of death was still in the hands of Clemvox and Naruto. The acquisition of this priesthood only meant that he could gain followers of death and let the fanatics visit the domain of death. The light of divinity dissipated. As Soren extracted the power of the Horned Crown, this high-grade divine item quickly became an ordinary item. Soren played with the divine item in front of him and murmured, "Although the power of divinity is gone, but its characteristics are very good. Divine creation. Create high-grade magic items. Change form." With the golden light of divinity, the Horned Crown turned into a melted liquid in the palm of Soren's hand. Then he injected a little of his divinity into it, and soon the divine item was reshaped by him. 7 strange rings appeared in front of his eyes. Soren melted the core gem and injected it into the last ring. Then he used suggestion, control, and the power of divinity bit by bit. The characteristics of the Horned Crown were very similar to the one ring created by Soren, and it had the effect of psychological suggestion and mind control. Now he remade 7 rings with the Horned Crown and kept the last one as a controller to make a new divine item. Different from the one ring made in the past, this time the one ring was injected with the power of the priesthood of death by Soren. These rings would give the wearer a powerful blessing, but also because of the Horned Crown, the one ring would erode the wearer's body. Finally, The wearer of the One Ring would be transformed into the undead after death, and it would be a more advanced binding spirit endowed with the power of death. The horned crown itself has a binding spirit. Soren thought about it and extracted a little divinity from between his eyebrows. Then he said, "In this case, directly use the One Ring as the medium to create a high-grade ring spirit." A little divinity was injected into the One Ring. The original power of the horned crown was strengthened again. Soren gave up the original advantage of numbers and concentrated the power of death. When the first owner of these rings died, a powerful ring spirit would appear. The divine item was gradually completed. Soren finally left his own inscription on the One Ring, and then put them all away. The One Ring was completed. However, it still needed to be considered who to give it to because the ability of the first owner affected the power of the ring spirit. The bottomless abyss. The third layer. The forgotten land. In the depths of the hot lava, the figure of the Baelor leader, Sauron, appeared. Behind him were teams of fire demons. Compared to the previous time, the number of fire demons had increased a lot, and the number of fire demons had increased to 8. Under Sauron's gaze, these fire demons entered the lava one by one. Then he cut open his palm and injected a little bit of the Baelor's blood essence. This could help the fire demons obtain a medium to upgrade. When the accumulated demonic power was strong enough, these fire demons would have the opportunity to evolve and become new fire demons at any time. Sauron looked down at the lava pool in front of him and murmured, "It's almost time to prepare for a bloody battle." Chapter 1025. It was almost November. With the arrival of the new year, the disaster of the undead finally broke out completely. The Northwind city in the Frost Kingdom was breached by the Dragon Lich, and more than 100,000 people were slaughtered by the undead. When she heard the news, the angry Princess Royal directly froze hundreds of thousands of undead. But it was too late. The souls of the mortals seemed to have been taken away by some evil force, and the underworld did not welcome these victims. The same thing was happening all over the continent. Far away in the Eastern Kingdom, the Boat of the Desert was also attacked by the evil ancient mummies. A large number of innocent civilians were killed, and their souls mysteriously disappeared. There was a great change in the underworld. After Clemvox was seriously injured and disappeared, Naruto did a very bold thing. He opened a passage and linked his kingdom to the underworld. Then a war broke out between his servants and Clemvox's servants. This war undoubtedly ended with Naruto's victory. Without the support of Clemvox, his servants could not resist at all. Soon, the source of the underworld, the palace of the Nether Sea, was directly occupied by Naruto. Clemvox almost completely lost control of the underworld, and now the only surviving thing was the kingdom attached to the underworld. At the same time, many undead kings began to appear in the underworld. Owo the Immortal blatantly plundered souls from the underworld and turned them into undead. Many spellcasters attached to the spiritual world and the underworld also turned into liches one by one. But what was puzzling was that Jurgil did not seem to care about the drastic changes in the underworld, and Naruto did not disturb Jurgil's palace at all. Jurgil was still recording the deaths. But this time his followers seemed to have begun to record more deaths, not only of creatures but also of the world. The series of upheavals accelerated the conflict in the material plane. In order to protect the souls of their believers, the gods almost no longer relied on the Death Pantheon. They sent out their own oracles from another world to be responsible for guiding the souls. And without the watch of the Death Pantheon, in the situation of the outbreak of the undead, the demons, devils, and demons of the lower planes took the opportunity to plunder souls. The most obvious manifestation. It was in the third layer of the abyss, the Forgotten Land, that the Baelor demon leader soon found that there were more night witches and hags with abyss worms. Even the Yugoloths were no longer in the business of ferrying the Styx. On the contrary, they began to sell cheap souls. Most of them were ordinary people, not professionals. The order of the entire underworld was in chaos. The soul stealers began to blatantly harvest souls. Due to the turmoil in the underworld, drastic changes occurred in the Rift Plane and Bator Hell in just half a month. The number of low-level demons and devils that were converted had increased explosively. The underworld had always restricted the number of souls entering the underworld. But now this restriction was gone. While the undead were crazily snatching souls, the demons and devils took the opportunity to fish in troubled waters. At this moment, in the sixth tributary of the underworld, which ran through the 5 layers of the abyss, it was originally guarded and maintained by Clemvox's servants of death, but now there was no one here. Naruto did not intend to manage the Styx now. He sent all his servants of death to the battle, and the tributary here became the battlefield of the demons and the evil, soul stealers. They frantically plunder souls from here. At the same time, because of the loss of the divine power of death, the chaotic nature of the abyss began to break out. A subconsciousness filled with violence and chaos was eroding the Nether River. In the endless meandering Styx, the river that ran through the entire lower plane seemed to be interfered with by some chaotic force, and the souls floating in it would disappear every once in a while. At the same time, somewhere in the first 10 layers of the abyss, a new abyss worm would quickly appear. Crimson Flat. This was the territory of the Baylor demon leader Sauron, and it was also a special area close to the tributary of the Styx. Recently, some changes began to happen here. This change was still very short, about a week or so. When Soren just received the news of the abnormality in the Styx, something strange had already happened here. Not far away was the Styx, but now a part of the Nether River seemed to have been cut off. The Nether River, which was originally one, began to diverge. Then one of them poured into the ground below. This place was called the Crimson Flat, because the land here had turned crimson due to some unknown reason, and now the land here was even redder. A tributary of the Styx seemed to have gone deep into the ground. Since then there had been an abnormality here. In just one day, thousands of abyss worms had appeared. There was a probability of the abyss transforming into demons, but the probability of transformation was definitely not that high. About 3 days later, the number of abyss worms here had reached about 10,000, and then the first batch of Dretch born in the slaughter appeared. The Dretch occupied this place and began to devour other abyss worms. Soon, the most powerful demon was promoted to a berserk demon, and then to a new Glabrizu. According to the normal progress, a low-level demon lord might be born here. But since this was Sauron's territory, the abnormality was soon discovered by his subordinates. The abyss had been transforming more and more abyss worms recently, but there were still very few like here. About the 5th day, the real change appeared. In the center of the Crimson Flat there was a huge pit. It seemed to be formed by the collapse of its own accord, and then some kind of blood-red liquid began to gather in the pit. The speed of the liquid gathering was very fast, and the color of the nearby land gradually dimmed. Then, it seemed that all the abyss worms went crazy in an instant. The source of the Styx was constantly stealing souls. In just one day, tens of thousands of abyss worms were born. At the same time, these abyss worms were madly attacking and devouring each other. They ate the dead abyss worms, but they did not evolve. These abyss worms were getting bigger and bigger. It seemed that there was some kind of powerful force protecting them. They continued to evolve in the form of abyss worms. At first, Sauron's subordinates could still get close. Later, even the high-grade demons did not dare to get close because in the center of the flat, there was a huge blood pool. The area was more than 10 times larger than the blood pool controlled by Sauron. After the frenzied slaughter, 3 abyssal worms were fortunate enough to survive. Each of them was more than 20 meters long, and their skin was tougher than dragon skin. Even the high-grade demons sent by Sauron ate one of these crazy worms. They did not allow anyone to get close to the blood pool. This was a newborn blood pool and it did not have any master. Under the influence of the subconsciousness of the abyss, the first function of the blood pool was to transform a mother worm. The 7th day, Sauron's figure came here. He looked down at the huge blood pool in front of him and murmured, "It seems that the mother worm is about to be born." Just like raising venomous insects, out of hundreds of thousands of abyssal worms, only 3 of them survived. Any one of them was strong enough to fight against the old dragon, but the power of the abyssal law had yet to bless them, because only the last survivor could become the mother of worms. When this transformation was completed, the mother worm would be blessed with the power of the law. It would have the power of a demigod and become the lowest grade secondary demon lord. Every level of the abyss had a mother worm scattered around. They were the lowest grade secondary demon lords and only guarded near the blood pool. They were responsible for the birth and transformation of abyss worms. It seems that we still need to wait. Sauron's eyes showed a hint of excitement. After the birth of the mother worm, the blood pool will be truly formed. Such a big blood pool. And the source is directly connected to the Nether River. I wonder how many souls it can transform in a day. Sauron's original blood pool was only 1/10 the size of this one. It could transform about 300 to 500 abyss worms a day. The huge blood pool in front of him was 10 times the size of that one. The transformation ratio was of course more than 10 times. If it was connected to the Nether River due to the influence of the abyss, the number of transformed abyss worms might increase explosively. Sauron was the demon lord here. Naturally, this new blood pool would be its territory. When the real Mother of Worms was born, it would need to conquer this place, and then its army would expand rapidly. Immediately dispatch the third demon legion to guard this place. Sauron thought for a while and ordered the elite succubus beside him. Don't let anyone come close. Don't disturb the battle of the Mother Worm. Pay attention to the Nether River nearby. Other demons are prohibited from approaching this area. Although Naruto's actions greatly increased the power of the undead, the subconsciousness of the abyss seemed to have taken the opportunity to bite off a large piece of meat from the underworld. In the lower plane, the abyss had the most tributaries of the Nether River. If there was a new blood pool in Sauron's place, then there would be new blood pools in other levels of the abyss. Perhaps after the underworld lost the management of the death god system, there would be an explosive growth of demons in the lower plane. The gods could only take care of their own believers now, and they must be the souls of devout believers. As for the souls of the other dead, they could only pray for themselves now. The Nether River had been cut off. The powerful death god system had been managing many tributaries of the Nether River. But with the success of Naruto's plot, these tributaries of the Nether River all fell into the hands of the lords of the lower plane. Demons, and undead were trying to steal souls from the Nether River. If the Nether River was not very dangerous, the souls in it would have been divided up. Chapter 1026. In the boundless astral plane. A steel fortress of the Githyanki stopped at the border of the clock Nirvana mechanical realm, and then a group of heavily armed soldiers came down. At the border of the clock Nirvana mechanical realm, there was already a Thaling waiting. Behind him were steel golems. When the Githyankis in front of him approached, Thaling walked over and said, "Welcome. I'm Thaling 7. I'm responsible for receiving this batch of materials for Sir Soren, and I'll give you the bill later." Needless to say, these Githyankis were the batch that Soren had looted. No one dared to default on the debt of a god, especially a notorious evil god. This was the second batch of goods of the Githyankis. In order to pay off the debt owed to Soren, they had looted a lot of places recently. But fortunately, Soren also gave them a little benefit, such as the reward that some gods could give. Soren didn't need these Githyankis to be loyal, he just needed them to pay back what they owed him. The leader of the Githyankis nodded, then motioned the soldiers next to him to transport the materials. Looking at these things that they had worked hard to loot were handed over to Thaling, his expression couldn't help but be a little painful. But when he thought of the terrible evil god, he finally decided to hand over the goods honestly. At the same time, at the back of the mechanical realm, Thaling 1 was calculating the next batch of goods. How many steel golems have been completed in this batch? About 120 golems. Well, then let's go to Mordor City first. The war in the material plane seems to be getting worse. Are these undead going to kill all the living? Who cares about them? Anyway, we are construct life. After all, the production of Mordor City was still limited. In order to increase the number of steel golems, Soren commissioned Thaling to help with the production. As the turmoil gradually intensified, there were more and more channels to obtain soul crystals. Mordor City could now produce a large number of steel golems. Thaling number 1 glanced at the list and said, "First, 100 steel golems and 10 diamond golems." It seems like Sir Soren has obtained a large number of diamonds. The third batch of orders is actually dominated by diamond golems. Could he have found a diamond planet in the astral plane? Thaling did not reply. In fact, most construct life forms were rather boring, even more so than demons. Mordor City. Soren could no longer sit still after the undead calamity broke out. He was not the only one who could not sit still. The other gods could not sit still either. They could slightly ignore the life and death of mortals, but if it involved the foundation of the kingdom of God, what about the souls of the believers? The god of war finally made his move. After enduring for so long, the Church of War launched an operation to clean up the undead for the first time. Their apostle army also entered the lower plains to ensure that the river Styx connected to the kingdom of war would not be disturbed. The river Styx was like a blood vessel. From the beginning of a small river, it slowly grew to all parts of the multiverse. With the gradual increase of the population, many souls were no longer personally led, but relied on the river Styx to transport them. This was also the covenant made by the gods. The god of death was responsible for collecting the souls and finally sending them to the kingdom of the gods. But now that Klemvox had lost control of the underworld, this covenant was naturally invalid. The first thing the gods thought of was to ensure that the souls of their believers could return to the kingdom of God. Only then would they have other thoughts to think about others. It had to be said that the gods were also selfish. The Legion of the Church of War cleaned up the undead in the southwest of the continent. At the same time, they gathered a large number of adventurers to eliminate the undead. Once a god with great divine power made a move, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. The moment the power controlled by the god of war was activated, a large number of melee professions immediately gathered. At the same time, the goddess of strategy also cooperated with them. It seemed that they were ready to clean up the undead in the southwest plains. Thud thud thud. There was a sound of footsteps. Then Gloria's figure appeared in the room. She came over with a document in her hand. She frowned slightly and looked at Soren's face, then said, "Are you going to establish a country?" Soren looked up. He looked at Gloria's beautiful face, then gently waved his hand. Gloria came over and sat on Soren's knee, letting him put his hand into her robe and hold her gradually plump breast. His fingers seemed to have magical powers, causing her face to turn crimson and her breathing to quicken unconsciously. Soren seemed to be thinking about something. He bowed his head and said, "Yes." Gloria came back to her senses and adjusted her breathing. "Why Adele Isabella? If we establish a country on the south coast, what about Mordor?" Gloria's mind was still very clear, even if she was very shocked after knowing this. Soren fiddled with the bud and said slowly, "First of all, Adele Isabella has the blood of Queen Isabella. Second, she is the nominal lord of the Wind Spear Hills. There is no one in Mordor who is more suitable and can reduce criticism than her. The South Coast is the South Coast. The establishment of a country on the South Coast has little to do with Mordor. It's just a name for reasonable expansion. Everything will still run as it was." Gloria took a deep breath and said, "You didn't choose her because she served you?" "Serve. Of course, it was not the service of following a god, but another kind of service between a man and a woman." Soren shook his head. "Do you think I'm so easily influenced?" Gloria was finally relieved. She got up and kissed Soren on the face and whispered, "Then do what you're going to do. I'll always be on your side." In fact, Soren asked someone to give this document to her, and she was already relieved. However, she still had to ask. The two princesses of Arendelle had already made her a little vigilant. Gloria felt that she should fight for more for herself and her mother. There was a huge piece of land in front of Soren's eyes. The topographic structure of the entire southern part of the continent was marked on it, and the location of the red dot was the Wind Spear Hills. Adele Isabella. Soren pondered and said to himself, "Queen Isabella's blood. Since the Arcane Empire, there have been few powerful empires in the material plane. If Adele Isabella is secretly allowed to establish a kingdom, then the entire south coast from the south of Waterdeep City to the border of the Principality of Rossard. It can be regarded as the homeland of Queen Isabella. Separate the secular world and maintain the purity of Mordor. Use the power of the secular world to strengthen Mordor, use the council to control Mordor, and ensure that the direction of Mordor has minimal impact on myself. The future. Even if Mordor is corrupted as a god, I can easily purify Mordor directly from top to bottom. P.S. First update. I have something to do recently and I need to sort it out. The latter part is important. Chapter 1027. No country could last forever. Even the powerful Silver Age and the Arcane Empire were also destroyed. A country could only live for a few hundred years at most, and a god would be unlucky if he died in less than 3,000 years. Soren could never tie himself to the kingdom. Otherwise, when a country was corrupted, Soren would also be corrupted. The same was true for Mordor. Soren established the parliament to deal with this situation. Maybe Mordor could maintain its current prosperity for 100, 200, or 300 years, but what about 500 or 1,000 years later? There would be a day when the power class of Mordor would gradually corrupt. When the system of Mordor became a barrier, and the lower-class civilians began to accumulate resentment, would Soren also be affected? He had to return to the kingdom of God. Therefore, from the moment Soren founded Mordor, he was ready to use an iron fist to completely cleanse the system of Mordor when it was corrupted in the future. The power class needed to be replaced. This might be hundreds of years later, but Soren had to be prepared in advance. When he returned to the kingdom of God, Soren would divide the world to ensure his superiority as a god, and at the same time, when the corruption of Mordor reached the critical point of his tolerance, he would carry out a bloody cleansing process from top to bottom. Not only Mordor but even the Church of the Gods was the same. Why did the gods keep a proper distance from the Church? It was because even if the Church did something wrong, it could be blamed on some people inside the Church. Any church would inevitably be corrupted, and when this corruption appeared, the gods would eliminate it at the right time. For example, there used to be a fallen archbishop of the Lord of Light. All the sins he had committed were his own. The Lord of Light, on the other hand, could not see everyone because he was far away in mountain paradise. When this cancer was removed, the suffering believers and civilians would only resent the archbishop instead of the Lord of Light, because the Lord of Light would always be great. This was the power of the gods. Soren divided the interior of the church, divided the power of Mordor, and arranged the kingdoms on the south coast. It was all for this. In the end, Soren needed to remove himself from these and become a sharp sword hanging over the south coast of Motor City, so that all the ambitious people would not be corrupted quickly, and at the same time complete purification, when necessary. Adele Isabella was a very important key. In the beginning, as a descendant of Queen Isabella, she was able to help Soren rightfully control some of the lands on the south coast. But now, because of the impact of the 3 Avatar crises, the entire southern region had been seriously damaged. Many lands had been barren and many towns had been destroyed. Now there were many ownerless lands. However, even if it was an ownerless land, it could not be casually occupied. This required a reasonable status. And Adele Isabella was Soren's rightful wife. The establishment of a kingdom would not be obstructed at this moment. After completing all of this, the Windspear Hills would be able to expand their territory and quickly swallow up the nearby plains, leaping to the size of the Principality of Rossard. This was beneficial to Soren's future plans, as land was the most important thing for population growth. However, after thinking about it, Soren said to himself, these still need some royal recognition. Maybe it's time to visit Princess Royal. Establishing a kingdom was establishing a kingdom. Soren was Soren. As a god, Soren could secretly control the kingdom, but once it was established, even if everyone knew that Soren was secretly controlling everything, they could never put Soren in the position of king on the surface. That was an act of digging a hole and burying oneself. Adele Isabella was a suitable candidate. As a fanatic of Soren, she would definitely return to the kingdom of God after death, and this kingdom would be handed over to her to control. Even if the kingdom was destroyed in the future, Soren's divinity would not be unstable. But this was still a risky move. Why did many gods only control a city at most and not a kingdom? The reason was that the kingdom was too short. For any god, a few hundred years in a kingdom would pass in the blink of an eye. The corruption of the noble class would inevitably lead to the collapse of the kingdom. If a god was dragged into this quagmire of karma, the result would be terrible. Even the goddess of aristocracy was wise enough to maintain a distance from any kingdom. She only maintained the system of protecting the nobles, but she would not easily approach any kingdom. The system must be reconsidered. Soren looked at the map and pondered. There was a large area drawn on it, which was the land that needed to be occupied in the future. The aristocratic system is too backward. But without the nobles, the civilization of this era is completely impossible. It will take a long time to popularize it. The best way now should be to separate the nobles' titles from the kingdom's official positions. The feudal system is definitely not possible. The characteristic of this era was that a certain noble was basically the manager and ruler of a city, but this was not the system Soren needed. He would appropriately keep the nobles. But the power of the kingdom must be centralized. What Soren wanted was centralization, and at the same time to ensure the appointment and dismissal of any official positions in the kingdom. He would greatly reduce the nobles' land and remove them from the whirlpool of power. The situation where the nobles were equal to the emperors of the kingdom was absolutely intolerable. For Soren, the steps could not be taken too far. He did not care how long the kingdom could exist, but he cared about how much power the kingdom could have during this time. Population, land, resources. Soren needed a large number of believers, and everything was to serve this purpose. Not only his believers but also Vivian's, Gloria's, and even fallen witch Curran's. Soren wanted to establish a god system, and a god system was often born within a race. Even if the human population was the largest, there were only so many god systems. The entire Amazon rainforest could support the belief of the Storm Lord. Similarly, Sauron needed a lot of people in order to support his own divine system. Now that Gloria was already a demigod, Vivian was gradually learning to control the belief. When Vivian was fully adapted, she should stand on the stage and expand her believers. Otherwise, the little girl was likely to be reduced to lesser divine power. I should go and see Adele Isabella in a few days. Soren stood up and murmured, but now maybe I should go and divide the wealth of the river Styx. He had a big plan. It was a very bold plan. Basically, the gods of the good alignment would never do it. The gods of the evil alignment also needed to carefully consider it because this plan was cut off the river Styx. P.S. Guess what Soren is going to do with the river Styx? Chapter 1028. Cutting off the Styx. This was a very dangerous act. Because no matter who dared to tamper with the Styx at any time, it would be regarded as a very serious provocation by the Death Divine system. This could even lead to a war between the divine kingdoms, so even when the Avatar crisis broke out, no one dared to tamper with the Styx. This situation continued until the disappearance of the King of the Dead, Clemvox. In the situation where Naruto and Clemvox were at loggerheads, finally some daring people began to have ideas about the Styx. There was no doubt about it. Soren was also one of these daring people. The greatest value of the Styx itself was transportation. Yugros and some demons relied on ferrying on the Styx for a living, and they also acted as assistants of the Death Divine system. However, the most valuable thing of the Styx was the goods it transported, which were souls from all over the multiverse. No matter what race or plane, most of the souls had something to do with the Styx. Soren's goal was the third layer of the abyss, the Forgotten Land. The Forgotten Land was mentioned before, but there was one thing that must be reiterated here, that was, the birth of the name Forgotten Land had a very important relationship with the Styx itself. In this level of the abyss, many demons tended to forget certain things more easily than in other places. Even people from other worlds who arrived here had to pass a compulsory exemption test after staying here for a period of time. Otherwise they would lose some memories of the past. The forgotten memories were related to their own abilities and the importance of the memories. They might forget small things like eating and drinking, or they might forget their own identity and so on. The Forgotten Land was a good place because the demons born here were purer. Most of them only retained part of their fighting instincts from their previous lives, and most of their memories had disappeared. This meant that they were born blank and were easier to be controlled by the Demon Lord. The key reason why this happened in the Forgotten Land was the Styx. There was the main road of the Styx in the upper layer of the abyss, and the most tributaries of the Styx in the first 10 layers, and some of these tributaries penetrated into the Forgotten Land itself. Because of the erosion of the Styx, the creatures here were more likely to forget some things than in other places. In short, the Forgotten Land was like a huge delta surrounded by the Styx. The main stream and tributaries of the Styx surrounded this place. Soren's target was the 7th tributary of the Styx. This place was close to the border of the Forgotten Land, which was also close to the edge of the distorted void. The Styx itself was protected by some kind of law power, and at the same time, it had a strong corrosive effect and could make the dead and the living forget some things. The width of the 7th tributary was about 20 meters. Branching off from the side of the Styx's main road, it broke into the Gulumba arena about 100 kilometers away from Soren's Kingdom of God, and finally passed through the Forgotten Land to reach the 7th and 8th levels of the abyss. Almost every tributary of the Nether River was connected to the lower levels of the abyss. In the direction of the Gulumba arena, the new giant blood pool was connected to the 5th tributary of the Styx. Soren's target was the 7th tributary of the Styx. Golden light converged. It was rare that Soren personally went to the bottomless abyss. After mastering the divinity of death, Soren was basically involved in the struggle of the Styx, and he was bound to collide with them in the future. Therefore, after deciding to attack the Styx, Soren did not hesitate at all and directly descended in his true body. Divine form. With the gathering of a huge amount of divine power, Soren's figure turned into a golden giant. Other people in this plane seemed to have sensed it, especially those powerful demons who had the one ring given by Soren. At this moment they looked at this side with awe. Change space. The surrounding space gradually distorted. The Styx was a very dangerous thing. Even the gods could not touch it easily. Only those who had mastered the power of death could touch it, but they would also feel very uncomfortable and slightly corrosive. The space in front of him gradually distorted. Some kind of powerful law power collided with the power of Soren's divinity, so that the surrounding soil was suspended in the air. The Styx was the product of the law. From a small river to a huge vein through the multiverse, the Styx itself carried a very powerful force. Change size. Change reality. Change form. The power of the three divinities was activated at the same time. Soren's figure stood on the ground, then waved his hand, and the dark red soil in front of him separated directly, gradually turning into a river of more than 3,000 meters long and about 20 meters wide. The earth split open. The powerful power of the gods was revealed at this moment. Soren directly transformed part of the terrain of the bottomless abyss in front of him with the great divine power accumulated by the city of Moder. The water of the Styx collided violently. As if breaking through the limit of some law, the tributary of the Styx in front of him directly changed its course, and part of the water poured into the river opened by Soren. Divine creation. A golden light went directly along the new river, like a rainbow bridge guiding the flow of the Styx. A large amount of water mixed with the souls in it poured into the new river and moved forward quickly. The original tributary of the Styx suddenly dropped a lot. Wails and howls of agony could be heard from all around. Vaguely, there was also some sort of subconscious, terrifying backlash energy. Soren's face was pale. He was under the terrible pressure of the water of the Styx at the moment, but Soren did not flinch at all. Instead, he continued to guide the divine power to transform the Styx in front of him. Divine shock wave. After the water of the Styx was introduced into the new river, Soren's golden light skyrocketed, and then a powerful shock wave of divine power hit the mountain next to him. The mountain of nearly 100 meters high was directly cut off by Soren. God's descent. Soren's figure turned into a golden giant that was hundreds of meters high. He directly held the broken mountain in front of him out of thin air, and then smashed it down toward the original tributary of the Styx. Boom! There was a loud noise that shook the earth. The mountain of hundreds of meters was directly cut off by Soren and thrown into the original Styx. For a time, the whole tributary of the Styx was cut off, and the huge mountain became a dam that blocked the river. Divine reconstruction. The water of the Styx washed the mountain in front of him. The strong corrosiveness quickly eroded the soil and exposed the solid rock. Soren turned his divine power into a golden light curtain attached to the mountain in front of him. Then he waved his hand and broke the original law barrier with his divine power. In one breath, the water of the Styx was completely diverted into the river that he created. Boom! The surging water of the Styx flowed and quickly reached the end of the new river. It was a huge pool, but all this was just on the surface because there was a space passage under the pool. It was directly connected to Soren's kingdom. The whole transformation process was barely half completed here. The other half of Soren's transformation was in his kingdom. Chapter 1029. The Shadow Kingdom. In the beginning, this kingdom was too close to the shadow plane, so the interior was half shadow. Everything was gray. Most of the petitioners in the divine kingdom were also shadow creatures. However, as Soren took control of the divine kingdom, everything inside was reconstructed. Especially the original gray world, now there were more colors. However, the entire kingdom was very large. Without entering the kingdom, Soren couldn't completely reconstruct it, so the northwest part of the kingdom was still the desolate shadow kingdom. However, there were some special changes happening here. A huge pool of reincarnation was placed here. Petitioners couldn't get pregnant or reproduce, even though the gods had given them a lifespan of thousands of years. However, no petitioner could get pregnant. Even the otherworldly god servants could only be created in the form of angels. That was why the population of the kingdom couldn't be increased internally. They could only rely on souls from other worlds. This was also the reason why some gods' divine kingdoms would quickly wither or even be directly destroyed after their churches in the material plane were destroyed. Groups of heroic spirits stood guard at the border. There was a river at the border of this land. When Soren used his powerful divine power to break through space and bring the water of the river Styx into the kingdom, the special pool of reincarnation was activated. Soren couldn't casually turn souls into petitioners. However, he could turn these souls into other forms. Demons were just one of the ways he could transform them. When the river Styx brought the souls into Soren's kingdom, the pool of reincarnation was activated under the influence of the plane's laws. Then a shadow appeared near the pool of reincarnation. This was just the beginning. When the first shadow appeared, the second and third quickly followed. Then, there were other forms of souls and higher-level shadow creatures. The pool of reincarnation automatically turned them into shadow creatures of the same level according to the differences in their nature. In just a short while, there were hundreds of shadow creatures gathered around the pool of reincarnation. They had long lost their memories of their previous lives. After being turned into shadow creatures, they were hostile to others. These shadow creatures fought each other and even attacked petitioners who came close, but were quickly destroyed by the heroic spirits. Outside the divine kingdom, Soren panted as he retracted his godly power. Even a god would find it difficult to change the course of the river Styx, but it seemed like he had succeeded. The first monster pool seems to have been completed. Soren closed his eyes and sensed everything in his god's kingdom. Although he couldn't enter, it didn't mean that he couldn't sense anything. Gods in the later stage of the Avatar crisis could already know something about his god's kingdom. Farming in the monster pool. This was what Soren was planning to do with the Styx. It wasn't just the abyssal blood pool that could steal the souls of the Styx and turn them into demons. The Shadow Plane's reincarnation pool could also transform shadow beings. What Soren did was to keep the souls in this tributary of the Styx. Most of the material planes were pan-believers. After they died, many of them would not enter the kingdom of the gods. Instead, they would flow along the river Styx to the origin sea to be reshaped. What Soren was doing right now was akin to a thief. He was constantly stealing souls into his divine kingdom and using the pool of reincarnation to turn them into shadow beings. It was like a monster pool. As long as there were souls passing through this tributary of the Styx, the pool of reincarnation would constantly spawn shadow beings. What's more important is that the god's kingdom itself was very close to only entering and not leaving. As long as a soul entered the god's kingdom and was killed, a part of the soul power would be absorbed by the petitioner and used to evolve into a heroic spirit. The other part of the soul power would automatically be integrated into the god's kingdom itself. Once Soren entered the god's kingdom, he would be able to mobilize it. It was mentioned before. Petitioners could also die. When they died, their soul power would automatically dissipate into the god's kingdom, and the god's kingdom would absorb this soul power to expand its area. Matter itself was made up of energy. The soul power was closer to the lowest energy structure. After the transformation, the god's kingdom could continuously expand its area. At this moment, inside Soren's god's kingdom, thousands of shadow beings had already appeared. They quickly expanded and occupied a territory of about 50 square kilometers. Outside this area was where the heroic spirits under Soren's command were stationed. Farming also required raising monsters. Shadow beings that were too low level weren't worth much. Soren set up an area with the pool of reincarnation as the center of the god's kingdom for these shadow beings to expand and grow. As long as the Styx's water was constant, these creatures wouldn't decrease. When the shadow beings reached a critical point, it would be time for the heroic spirits to eliminate them. This number couldn't be too high, or the heroic spirits would die. But it couldn't be too low either. Otherwise there wouldn't be too much profit. According to Soren's estimation, if there weren't any major natural or man-made disasters that would cause too many deaths in the material plane, the god's kingdom's farming area could be cleared once every 3 days. The accumulated soul power would gradually expand the area of the god's kingdom. It would also automatically extract energy from the elemental channels to form new matter. Could be the sea or the mountains. When Soren wasn't in the god's kingdom, the birth of these new matter was random. Only when the gods were in the god's kingdom could they control whether the area of the sea or the land increased. At the same time, in the third layer of the abyss, the Forgotten Land. After a whole day and night of fighting, the most powerful mother of worms finally appeared. She killed and swallowed the other 2 mother of worms. Then a huge abyssal worm of more than 30 meters long appeared in front of the other demons. This was the largest mother of worms that Sauron had seen so far. She even had the aura of a giant dragon. She was probably close to the strength of a weak god. It's me. It's the leader of the Baelor demons. The Lord of the Forgotten Land. Sauron's body was ignited in a raging fire. He walked step by step toward the mother of worms and said in a deep voice, "Lowly worm, submit under my feet. Or else, I will kill you without hesitation. I will extract your soul." The pressure of the demon lord shrouded the entire blood pool. Sauron flapped his demon wings and flew to the front of the mother of worms with a huge beheading sword in his hand. He waved the 30-meter-long flame whip gently, as if he would not hesitate to whip it down if there was any resistance. The newborn mother of worms seemed to be uneasy. It hesitated and seemed to resist. But in the end it gave up resistance because it could feel that it was no match for Sauron. Moreover, the mother of worms served the demon lord. Very good. After confirming that the mother of worms had submitted, Sauron slowly flew down. Behind him, a large group of succubus gathered. Sauron turned to them and said, "Control this place. No one else is allowed to come close. Give me the statistics of the number of abyssal worms born every day. Looks like my demon army needs to expand." One was the abyssal blood pool, and the other was the shadow reincarnation pool. In the third layer of the abyss, Sauron had already controlled 2 tributaries of the Styx. The longer he controlled them, the more souls he would steal. Chapter 1030. Dense Needle Forest. A tall human ranger was walking through the dense forest. She had a very high level of skill and seemed to be moving at a speed that ordinary people could not imagine. Soon, the human ranger reached her destination. It was a woodland planted with many trees. All the trees here were planted according to a specific pattern, and in the center was a huge pale golden oak. This was the sacred land in the forest. It was a place to worship the goddess of the forest and rangers, Mei-Li-Kai. This goddess did not have many temples, and her favorite altar was the sacred land in the forest. Often there must be an oak tree near this altar. Mei-Li-Kai was the daughter of the father of the oak tree and the most powerful god of nature. However, because the father of the oak tree and Mother Earth had disappeared one after another, Mei-Li-Kai did not have much say in the natural god system. The goddess had been trying to regain control of nature for a long time, but this attempt was not very successful. She was best at the forest priesthood. "My lord." The human ranger knelt down on one knee and said respectfully, "Recently, a large number of magic spiders have appeared in the forest in the southwest. Their numbers are increasing and they are reproducing quickly. I suspect that this is related to the drows in the Underdark. They seem to be planning to start a war with the surface elves. These minions of the Queen of Spiders are plotting something. Maybe we should try to stop them." In the center of the sacred land in the forest, a tall woman wearing exquisite green-brown leather armor turned around. She had an extremely beautiful appearance, but there was an indescribable heroic spirit about her. She was strong and beautiful. Mei-Li-Kai was a kind god with a sense of humor and always had a confident smile on her face. She was very cautious about making friends, but once she recognized them as friends, she would protect them eagerly and faithfully. Although she understood that death was also part of the cycle of life, she was not as indifferent as Sylvanus. Instead, she often intervened to heal the pain of creatures out of sympathy. This goddess had been guarding the forest. She was the goddess worshipped by the rangers. "What do you think?" Mei-Li-Kai turned around and looked at her side. An elegant golden unicorn was walking leisurely. After hearing Mei-Li-Kai's words, it raised its head and said in a clear voice, "It should be the Queen of Spiders' conspiracy. But the most important thing for us now is to protect the forest from being invaded by the undead. Presumably the elf god system can deal with the Queen of Spiders' conspiracy. We just have to make sure that the demonized spiders don't spread to other forests." A faint golden radiance. The unicorn in front of him exuded a noble and elegant aura, and the ranger beside her quickly bowed to her upon seeing her. This was the unicorn goddess, Surue. She was Marikai's most loyal friend, companion, and mount. Urue loved to wander around and her personality was a little capricious. However, once she believed that the other party was trustworthy, she would show her loyal friendship and would never abandon her believers who were in trouble. Iris would be a very difficult foe when she had to face a battle, but she loved the light banter, the clever puzzles, the strange discoveries, the delightful explorations of life. The unicorn goddess rarely managed the church, and her church was basically attached to Marikai's church. These two goddesses had a large number of ranger believers, and the priests would also part-time become rangers and droll. Among them, the priests and droll who believed in Marikai could use the ranger's weapon at will. This was a special ability given to them by the goddess, just like how Sorin's priests could use curved swords. Marikai heard this and fell into deep thought. After a while she looked up and said, "That's right. How are the dryads near the misty forest? Are they still not willing to merge with us?" The ranger gently shook his head. She thought for a moment and slowly said, "These dryads serve the father of the oak and believe that one day the father of the oak will return. But they seem to maintain a very close relationship with the Shadow Lord." The recovery of the entire Misty Forest is also closely related to this god. The Shadow Lord? The unicorn goddess heard this and showed an interesting expression. She whispered, "What kind of god is he? To be able to become a mid-level god in such a short period of time, there is no doubt that he is a true powerhouse. I want to thank him in person for killing that bastard Mailer. The god of the hunt, Mailer. He was the most hated person of the forest by the unicorn goddess, and she didn't mind killing him." Similarly, Mailer was eager to taste the blood of the unicorn goddess. She had always been eager to see Soren and express her gratitude. But she was also Maracai's ally and mount. When the Avatar crisis broke out, she must protect Maracai. This goddess might not be powerful, but she couldn't be underestimated because the unicorn itself was a very powerful creature. Many of the gods of the dragons were weak, and it wasn't easy to fight them. "Soren?" Maracai's face showed a trace of curiosity and murmured, "He seems to be different from the other evil gods we have seen. He protected the south and rebuilt the order. Maybe we can meet him when we have the chance." Although the gods rarely moved around, they were not isolated from the news. Soren's reputation had spread throughout the multiverse, and even the oldest gods knew about him. Spider Forest. This was a forest ruled by spiders. In this huge forest, there lived a large number of poisonous spiders, phase spiders, shadow spiders, and so on. Now, there was a very terrible spider. That was the black spider, enchanted spider. This spider was more than 3 meters long and wide, with sharp teeth and poisonous fangs. They multiplied rapidly under the influence of some kind of power, and now there were countless of them. The elves were forced to withdraw from here. Now the whole spider forest was covered with white spider webs. The forest that stretched hundreds of meters was pale white. The spider webs covered everything and hunted all the creatures that entered here, including the wandering undead. The speed of reproduction of the enchanted spiders was quite amazing. Through the spider webs, one could see many enchanted spiders living in the cave. Occasionally there were signs of activity, but there were thousands of them. Just a glance at them would make one's scalp tingle. Drool was monitoring here. The rangers were on guard. The nearby elves also felt uneasy, worried that these spiders would rush out and tear everything apart at any time. No one knew how many enchanted spiders there were. Since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the spiders here had been expanding rapidly. Now there were probably more than hundreds of thousands of them. No one knew where their food came from. Anyway, the number had not stopped growing. The nearby gnomes and dwarves had been forced to migrate, and even the ogres had been forced to escape. These spiders continued to cover the forest with spider webs, and they continued to expand toward the southwest. The area of the spider web was getting larger and larger, and eventually, it gradually approached the Elven Kingdom. This was a huge web made by the Queen of Spiders, Lolth. Looking at the whole multiverse, only she could control so many spiders. The drows in the Underdark seemed to be lurking, but the huge group of spiders was constantly expanding, and the twisted spider elves were becoming more and more common. Not only were the drows corrupted, but even the surface elves were turned into spider elves by some kind of secret method. This was the power of crafty approach. From the beginning, the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, had been constantly collecting the power of crafty approach, and now her giant web had officially taken shape. This giant web wrapped around the Elven Kingdom from all directions. But at the same time, because of the large number of spiders, the original ecological system of the material plane was seriously damaged, and she also aroused the vigilance and hostility of the goddess of the forest, Maracai. Motor City. Soren was tidying up everything in the study. After stealing the soul of Styx, his strength was increasing every minute. The demon army was expanding. The army of heroic spirits was growing. Soren was constantly accumulating power. This power must ensure that he could stand firm among the gods with great divine power, and this could not be done by the golem puppets alone. Brother? Brother. Right at this moment, an extremely excited voice sounded. Two identical Vivian, one black and one white, rushed into the room excitedly. "We've finally succeeded," Vivian said in a crisp voice. Vivian and Lillian. After such a long time, they finally adapted to the changes of the gods under the guidance of Soren and successfully completed the transformation of prayer and magic. "Congratulations." Soren smiled and hugged them. Vivian smiled and enjoyed Soren's hug. She was wearing a white princess dress. After she raised her head and kissed Soren's cheek, she suddenly seemed to think of something and said, "Oh, brother. Recently, Lulu's situation has been a bit strange. Can you go and see her? Soren raised his head and asked, Lulu? What's wrong with her? Lillian answered, she seems to be a little uncomfortable recently. She used to be alive and kicking every day. But recently, her spirit has been low, and she seems to be unable to speak. Soren frowned and said, okay. Let's go and see. Lulu lived next door to Vivian. With the increase of Mordor's strength, the battles that required her to participate in personally had decreased a lot. Speaking of which, Soren hadn't seen her for a while. Inside the room, Soren soon saw Lulu, who was in low spirits. When he saw Lulu in front of him, Soren's eyes immediately lit up, and he said in a deep voice, when did this happen to her? About a week ago, Vivian whispered from the side. Soren frowned and walked over, reached out and pressed Lulu's forehead and murmured, can you hear me? Did you come into contact with any god some time ago? Meow. Lulu opened her eyes with difficulty as if she hadn't slept for a long time. She muttered to herself, did I? I don't remember. After that, she fell asleep again. Vivian's expression suddenly became nervous. She had always had a close relationship with Lulu. She said anxiously, brother, what happened to Lulu? Soren's face was solemn. He turned and glanced at the little girl and said coldly, someone God wants to use her to be reborn. She was planted with a seed of divinity. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.